I'd like to call this meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Ammons. Here. Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Mr. Madigan.
Here.
Ms. Marlin.
Here.
Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Smythe.
Here.
Mayor Pressing.
Here.
Next up is approval of the minutes of the January 9th committee meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Aaron Ammons and seconded by Eric Jacobson. Any corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. For public input, I have from Reverend Dr. Evelyn and Bishop King James Underwood. Don't wish to speak, but they're continually concerned about the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer problem. Let's see. Jeff Putney doesn't wish to speak, but is in opposition to hiring more police. That one at the time of. And then Tommy Askins is here representing Elnack and Aspen Court, but will not speak. But I suppose if there are questions for him, we can ask him. And the other one is for at the time of. Anyone else want? Okay, and you've got a couple here.
I was going to read. I have email from Esther Pat. I'd like to share with the City Council a perspective about the police department that I hope you will consider in your decision-making tonight. One day when I walked into Schnucks, I saw a person who looked very distressed speaking to a police officer. I inferred from the officer's posture and tone of voice that he was speaking to a crime victim, but I was wrong. They were still talking along with another officer when I finished my shopping. As I walked past them to the checkout, I heard one officer gently explaining the law regarding trespass to property. Then I realized I was witnessing the crisis intervention team helping a person with a mental health problem calm down and quietly leave the building. I've seen similar interactions at the Urbana Free Library and twice at Lincoln Square. When the police respond to a call about criminal trespass and give the person the opportunity to avoid arrest by leaving, most people go quickly. But it can take a lot longer if the person has a mental health disability that impairs his or her judgment, or in some cases his or her perception of reality. I would much rather officers spend the extra time, as they do, with anyone whose special need requires it than arrest people who aren't immediately compliant. It's surprising that many members of the public who share that sentiment have framed the question of hiring more police officers as a choice between which we value more, mental health services or law enforcement. That's not the choice. There's no debate that the police department's workload has grown in the last 3 months. My question for you is this: without more personnel, how are you going to have enough officers to spend time helping people with mental health problems avoid arrest and address the sudden increase in gun violence? If you want to fund mental health services, start with Urbana Police Department, which is doing excellent work in that area. And I have one from Deborah Jadoff, who is not here, but she asked me to say what she wanted to say, which is she's opposed to hiring police until the issue of racial profiling in Urbana is addressed. And also Danielle Chinoweth has the same statement in opposition.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we have two presentations. The first is the annual market at the Square report by Natalie Kenny Marquez.
Hi, thanks for having me this evening. Usually I start with a joke about the weather, but the weather was so fantastic these past few days that kind of felt like we should have had a market outside. I think we had some markets in November that were colder than this past weekend. Let's start the presentation with the market's mission. I put it in the report and it's up here on the screen, but I thought it was important that I share that with you. The advisory board for the farmers market reaffirmed that mission this year, And I thought it was a great way to kick off the presentation as a reminder and a guide of all the things that we do at the farmers market, and what better way to highlight that mission through a video. So I have a short video to show you this evening.
We moved into the area about a year ago, and we were looking for a local farmers market, and this one popped up obviously pretty quickly.
I've been attending the market for about 5 years. When I roll out of bed, I'm like, oh my God, do I have time to make it to the market? Because there's these little ones that make it tough, but when we can come, it's the highlight of my week.
What I love about the market is coming outside and being outdoors with all the people. Everybody's really, really friendly. And seeing all the natural produce and the local products that people have is always really exciting.
My favorite is in the spring when the peaches are here. Oh, I love the peaches.
I love the produce, I love the food trucks, I love seeing people I know buy all those things along with me. We always love to at least come here for breakfast, and we always have a great time.
Yeah, the market is a great Saturday morning tradition. You go, you run into people you know, you get food to last you the rest of the week. It's a good opportunity to invent recipes that you don't want to have to think about later in the week.
I'm a Champaign-Urbana native, so I've been coming to the farmers market since I was probably 2 years old. This sweet corn truck right here is my favorite sweet corn in all of the world. I think it's great that our community is able to support such a large farmers market with such a wide array of different vendors and awesome produce and really amazing things.
Yeah.
So some of our highlights from this past season, we had 206 participants. That includes 45 growers. Those are the folks that bring the meat, dairy, eggs, honey, vegetables, and fruit. 30 value-added vendors. Those are vendors that bring the bread, the donuts, things like that, jams and jellies. We had 9 food trucks, 57 art and craft vendors, and 65 community groups. We continued with weekly programming. There was some type of programming every single Saturday, whether it was sampling and chef demos, which was new this season thanks to a law by the state of Illinois that allowed us to sample at the farmers market. Art at the Market, a program of the Urbana Public Arts Program. Sprouts at the Market, that's our children's programming for kids ages 3 to 8 years old. And then Read at the Market, that's a program that we do with the Urbana Free Library. We saw over 104,000 visitors. That means about 4,000 visitors per week over the 27-week season. We continued with Farm Fresh and Fast. Those are our recipe cards, and there should be a season series in front of each of you and some on the back table for any of you that would like them. Those recipes featured in-season ingredients available at the farmers market that were easy to prepare recipes, and I promise they tasted good. And we had meat this year in our recipe cards just for you. I had mentioned our advisory board. They meet quarterly. They are the ambassadors for the farmers markets. They talk to their peers, their vendors. They bring information to staff. This past year, they conducted a survey of all of the stakeholders, are in the process of updating their strategic plan, have reaffirmed the market's mission, and have affirmed 7 new priorities. They're in the process of developing initiatives to help reach those priorities. And we continued with a lot of outreach and education through appearances at community events, going out into the schools, conducting our Sprouts programs for different preschools and elementary age children, providing presentations, whether it be to the USDA about our SNAP program, which I'll mention in a few minutes, or to the Illinois Farmers Market Association or the Illinois Stewardship Alliance or the Land Connection, talking about the farmers market. And many collaborations, not just within the city between departments, but also in other organizations with similar missions. I'm very proud of our SNAP program at the farmers market. That's our Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This year we distributed $21,500 in SNAP. That includes SNAP and SNAP Double Value, thanks to some grants that we received this year. To put that in perspective, last year we distributed 15,414, and the year before 7,353. So I think we're doing something right here, and I hope that we can continue that into 2017. In addition to programming and our SNAP program, we also featured a lot of events this year. Community-supported agriculture, CSA Fair. We have one coming up in March, so I hope to see you there. We have regular farmers market blood drives, Bike to Market Month during the month of May, which includes bike valet and tune-ups and all sorts of bike information. We participated in National Farmers Market Week, which is the first full week of August. That included a kale eating contest this year. Some of those participants are sitting in front of me. Survivors. We hosted another Market at the Scare. That was our family-friendly Halloween program, which also this year included a chili cook-off. We paired a meat vendor and a produce vendor with the police department, the fire department, and the public works department. Built out a kitchen for each of the departments, and they went head-to-head with their own chili recipe, and the police department won. Congrats. I just want to emphasize our social media is one of our best ways to get the word out about what we're doing at the farmers market, about our programs and the things that we offer on every Saturday. The increases continue across the board, with Instagram being our most popular. Well, the largest increase from the previous year. People just love pictures of food and people having a good time. Some financial highlights. We're still focused on making incremental adjustments each season and working towards becoming a more financially sustainable and self-sufficient program. With the start of the 2016 season, we did initiate a modest vendor fee increase, which brought the fee to $25 per space per weekend. That was up from $20 per space per weekend, and that was the first increase in over 5 years. We saw some new revenue streams this past year, from Farm Credit to provide SNAP incentives, from Link Up Illinois to provide SNAP incentives, also from Link Up Illinois to provide SNAP administrative support to help carry out these programs. And that was a grant to cover the 2016 and 2017 farmers market season. And then we saw $1,500 from First Federal to support our children's programming. And we forecast our revenues and expenses to remain steady moving into this year. And let us tell you more at a new website that we're building out for this season, and I'm excited to launch that later this spring before we kick off the first Saturday in May. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Natalie. Aaron.
Well, I just thoroughly enjoy the farmers market and all that you all are doing. I appreciate it. Still remember us walking around Hamilton on the Park talking about SNAP benefits, so I'm always happy to see that the message is spreading all throughout the community. If you choose to participate as a vendor, do you have to like sign some sort of contract for all 27 weeks, or how does that work?
Nope, you don't have to do that. Actually, that's a great question. We have a pre-season meeting for vendors and community groups coming up this Thursday at the Civic Center from 3 to 5 p.m. We have a vendor handbook that covers all the rules and regulations to become a vendor or a community group at the farmers market. Vendors don't need to commit to the full season. If they only want to come certain Saturdays, that's totally fine. And all of the information is in here and on our website, and we'll have printed copies available if that's helpful.
Because I like to participate, but I only want to do it during the peach season. I have 2 peach trees, and my little rat terrier is protecting them quite well now, so I think I might have some extra. And you said the preseason meeting is when?
This Thursday at the Urbana Civic Center from 3 to 5 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Mike.
So first I'd like to say just congratulations on continuing a great tradition in Urbana. As a kid who grew up on a farm and could walk literally across the yard and pick all kinds of vegetables and eat them. Can't do that now that I live here, but this is the next best thing. Plus, there's a social aspect about it that is great too. You just see all kinds of great people. It really is a highlight of the Urbana summer. And thanks for making kale edible with adding ground beef in this recipe. That's outstanding. On a serious note, so I'm not quite sure from this nice brochure about how we are getting closer to being sustainable. So what is year over year the city's input into the farmers market?
That's a great question. So if we turn to that section, the only portion of the farmers market that the city has, besides the fees from the vendors cover everything, with the exception of a portion of the market director's
Well, but those
salary.
are fees from vendors, so I wouldn't count that. I'm just saying,
There's
like
a small
tax dollars.
portion of the market director salary that's covered not by vendor fees. So we're getting close to that full position. I think we're at 40% now, and that position is 50%. So we're very close.
Okay, so you're trending that way.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank
Mhm.
you.
Diane.
Well, there are no winners in a kale eating contest. I can assure you.
Put the ground beef in it.
Yeah, but my question is, we've talked a lot about in the past connecting the market to events downtown, and I wondered if there are any new plans this year, or that's still something that's under discussion for how to once people get to the market, how to keep them in the area and exploring other parts of the city. Do we have something in the works for that, or we're something to look at?
I think we always have something in the works at the farmers market, and I think that there's been a lot of movement towards getting to know some of the restaurants and businesses downtown and connecting our vendors with them to feature some of their ingredients and dishes, and to highlight that so that folks know that maybe they want to try this ingredient. They could go down to Dancing Dog or to Crane Alley and enjoy a meal that features ingredients from the market. So I think we're making steps that direction, and the advisory board is interested in building up Saturday mornings, and we're excited to host the CSA Fair on March 3rd, which is a first Friday evening, so we'll be a part of the downtown events that Friday night. So
Did the Celebrity Chef initiative feature chefs from downtown?
Being our first season, we really had one chef. The other time we had a vendor fill in, and then yours truly got stuck behind the table once or twice. So it was really filling out what we had the capacity to carry out. A lot of restrictions with what we're able to do out there. Building out a kitchen is no simple task either, and so making sure we're abiding by everything. And this was the first year that the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District and Market at the Square had this new sampling rule. So there was a little bit of learning together. And so we are prepared this season with some stainless steel prep tables and some better sinks and hand washing stations to really feature more chefs. I would like more chefs instead of me behind the table.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Aaron.
One follow-up connected to Diane's question is, how many of the businesses downtown, whether it's Pizza M or somebody like that, are actually involved in the farmers market? Do they come and do samples and stuff like that?
I see a lot shopping. I've definitely seen quite a few chefs come with full bags or pushing little carts, things like that. Dancing Dog had a booth at the farmers market this past season, and I believe that's the only business downtown that had a space at the market.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just simply add that kale goes well with barbecue, and anyone who eats kale is a winner. So I have some favorite recipes you can ask me about.
Perhaps if there were injectable kale.
I have some great recipes, Eric. I'll share them with you later. Okay. Any other questions for Natalie? Bill.
Just congratulations again on another good year.
Thank you.
I'm always impressed with what a community building event space it is and how people really take advantage of the venue to do things like bike rodeo that, where else would you do it? Maybe at a school, and you wouldn't nearly get the attendance. So just being able to have a place to go when you have some place to, or something to introduce to the community, like the Urbana Free Library participates and increase their library card holders, and it's just a really turns out to be a really nice space to do that in, and I think it's just keep doing a great job. And let people know about that too if they don't already. That if you have something to share with the community and you need attendees, that's a good place to get it out there.
Yep. Thank you.
I'm sorry. The schools, you said school appearances.
Mm-hmm.
Like high schools, are you trying to get the students to introduce them to gardening or something like that?
Fresh, healthy, Illinois-grown food. So, for example, we've been to a couple of elementary schools and preschools, more in the age group of 3 to 8 years old, where that might be their first experience having tried purple cauliflower or a yellow carrot instead of an orange carrot, things like that. But that's because we have that curriculum already built for Sprouts at the Market. It's easy to just go and do one of those programs there. But it's something that we can adapt definitely to young adults and even adults, and that's what we're trying to get into with the sampling and the chef demos and the recipe cards, showing how easy it is to cook something. We've taken the cooking show on the road, whether it be on CI Living or we went to Mix 94.5 and we cooked in one of their back rooms with one of the DJs and showed how easy it was to cook something. So we can take the show on the road, yeah.
Okay.
Dennis.
I'd like to ask maybe about the participation of community groups. I know that there are booths available to them. Do you find that there are more groups that would like to be at the market than you can provide for, or have the booths been somewhat empty during the summer? Can you give us a breakdown about that, how
Sure.
that interacts with the market?
This year we did see a few gaps, but we also had probably 7 or 8 very rainy Saturdays. And it's hard enough to get volunteers to come on any Saturday, let alone a rainy Saturday. And so there were instances where there were gaps at the market, not just for community groups, but for vendors a few times. I would say that very rarely do we turn someone away, and it might be at the very peak of the season in July or August. You can definitely tell when there's an event coming up or when school is almost back in session and people want to get the word out. Some of those Saturdays do fill up, but we keep a waiting list, and so if someone can't get in, I have their phone number written down, and if there's a cancellation, we'll call them.
Okay. Well, I guess it's Think Global, Eat Local. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, Rebecca Ginsburg is going to talk about mass incarceration.
Should I go ahead? Thank you very much for inviting me here. I understand I have 10 minutes to talk about a small little topic, mass incarceration and racial disparities. Our current system of mass incarceration is distinguished by 2 connected and deeply troubling conditions. The first is the proportion of people who are incarcerated in the United States. I think everybody here is familiar with the fact that up until the early 1970s, we ran at about 100 per 100,000 in jails and prisons. And scholars typically agree that 100 per 100,000 is a healthy and sustainable proportion of the population to be incarcerated at any one time. In the early 70s, due to a variety of different factors, the incarceration rate in the United States rose precipitously. It's currently at about 500 per 100,000. It peaked around, it started to peak in around 2008 and reverse, and of course we don't know what to expect in the coming years. So the rate of incarceration is one of the major features that distinguishes our era of mass incarceration. And the second is the racial complexion of those behind bars, and that's what I'm going to focus on. This slide shows that the rate of incarceration for whites in the United States is about 275 per 100,000. the rate of incarceration for African Americans in the United States is just over 1,400. This is actually 1,408 per 100,000. These disparities would be troubling, even if they represented the just application of criminal justice procedures within our communities. That is, if the reason for the disparities were that African Americans commit just over 5 times as many crimes as whites, and the police and courts were doing a good job of apprehending and prosecuting them, these statistics would be troubling enough. But the fact is that these statistics, these figures do not represent that. These disparities don't exist because the system is working. They exist because the system is not working. I want to talk about recent research in the last 5 to 10, 12 years that suggests that a main but not the only reason for these disparities is racial prejudice. The journey from the commission of an act to incarceration is a long journey, and at various points in that journey, officials within the criminal justice system have to exercise their discretion. They have to make judgments. It's the case that race seems to matter in the execution of those judgments, such that at any given decision-making points, whites are advantaged and African Americans are disadvantaged. So I want to take you through somebody's journey through the system. And I want to imagine that we have 2 people, an African American person and a white person. Let's make them men because I want them to be identical in all aspects except for their race. I want to have them same age, engaged in the same kinds of behavior. And we're going to follow them at each point, decision-making point through the process. At any given point, our African American actor is more likely to be reported in the first place. For example, African American man, white man, both changing tires on the side of a busy highway. A concerned citizen is more likely to report African American doing the same type of activity to the police than for a white doing the same activity. Given that report to the police, the African American is more likely, once the police come by to survey the situation, to be stopped and to be questioned than a white engaged in comparable activity, and once stopped, more likely to receive a ticket. Our African American actor is more likely than a white engaged in comparable activity to be searched and more likely to be arrested. And if it's a marijuana offense, up to 6 times more likely to be arrested for a white engaged in the same activity. Number 6, the African American actor is more likely to be detained in a jail and more likely to be charged. The African American defendant is more likely to receive ineffective counsel, and that's largely because of long historic reasons of black poverty. The African American defendant, after being found guilty, is more likely than the white defendant being found guilty to be sentenced to incarceration, to be sent to prison, and more likely to be sentenced for a longer period of time than a white defendant having been found guilty of the same offense. That's a lot, and it's been researched so much in recent years that scholars have helped us actually apply some numbers to these phenomena. So the chart that you have in front of you is a little complicated. I want us to walk through it. It doesn't identify each of the judgment points or decision-making points which we just discussed. It does identify some of the major ones, and it refers to something called a racial disparity the disparity issue, the racial disparity issue, So I have a pointer, but most of you are looking on your screens anyway, so I think I'll just try to talk us through it with you looking on your individual screen. Let's assume a population of 15% African American. I'm at the very top row now. Now I'm going to the second row. 15% of the population are African American, but percentage of those who are arrested for offenses are, of those, 30% are African American. So African Americans are arrested at twice the rate you would expect them to be, given their population in the representation of the population, which is why we have a disparity ratio there of 2. 30% of those who are detained held in prison, in jail, are African American. But 30% of those who are arrested are African American, but 35% of those who are detained are African American. 35% of those who are detained are African American, but 37% of those who are prosecuted are African American. And if you go down to the next row, it gets really hairy and compelling and troubling. 37% of those people in the United States who are prosecuted are African American. But 45% of those people who are prosecuted, 45% of those prosecuted who are found guilty, who are convicted, are African American. That 8% difference is a significant percentage difference. And it points again to the ineffective counsel that we referred to earlier and other factors. Once convicted, so 45% of those who are convicted in the American court systems are African American. 38% of those convicted who receive a sentence of probation are African American. So African Americans receive fewer offers of probation than do whites being convicted of. They are more likely, as you can see in the last column, in the last row, to receive sentences of incarceration, that is to say, to be sentenced to prison than are whites. Disproportionately less likely to receive probation and more likely to receive a sentence of incarceration. We don't have the time to delve into the richness of and the complexities of each of those decision points, but I want to close by showing 3 or 4 slides that explore and put some skin on, some flesh on some of those decision-making points. I want to start with percentage of stopped drivers who are searched by police. So of those drivers who are white drivers who are stopped by police, about 2.3% are searched. Of black drivers and Latino drivers who are stopped by police, about 6.7 or 6.8% are searched. Again, this is a judgment call that the police make, and it's a judgment call that seems consistently to run along racial lines and consistently disadvantage African American and Latino drivers and citizens more generally. Let's talk about pretrial detention. African Americans are more likely to be held in pretrial detention, and that matters not only because being held in jail is costly to individuals and to families, but also because those who are held in jail compared to low-risk defendants who are released prior to jail are 4 times more likely to receive a sentence of imprisonment, and 3 times more likely to receive a longer sentence of imprisonment than those who were not detained in jail. And there are many reasons that people have sought to explain, many factors which seem to explain that. Drug-related arrests by race. This is a slide, and there are many such many studies that demonstrate this, but this is a particularly compelling slide that demonstrates that people who engage in the same activity are likely to be dealt with by criminal justice authorities differently depending upon their race. Such that, for example, white people and black people who participate in drug-related activities at about the same rate, whites are much less likely to be arrested than are African Americans. And this continues through, the slide goes to 2010, but this continues to be the case even until today. And the last slide concerns plea offer types for felonies. What this shows us is there's a great difference between the type of pleas that are offered to white defendants and the types of pleas that are offered to black defendants, such that, for instance, I'm looking at the orange column now, black defendants tend to be offered community service about 9% of the time, whereas white defendants are offered community service about 14% of the time. We can compare that to jail time, jail or prison time. Black defendants, as part of plea offers, are offered prison or jail time 74% of the time, but it only forms part of a plea bargain agreement for whites 51% of the time. Again, these are areas where officials in the criminal justice system are able to exercise discretion, to exercise their best judgment. And when they do, it consistently disadvantages African Americans and advantages whites. I started by calling this racial prejudice. The more fashionable term these days is implicit bias, but you can call it what you will. It seems to be alive and well in the criminal justice system, and it produces the disparities, although it is not alone in producing the disparities that mark charts and so many other charts like these that show that African Americans and Hispanics are incarcerated at greater rates than are whites. This is something that I'm happy to share with you, though, because this is something that we can do something about at the local level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions for Professor Ginsberg? Dennis.
And when we're talking about the activities of the criminal judicial system or the justice system, are we talking about the actions of the police? Are we talking about judges? Are we talking about defense lawyers?
Yes.
All those.
All of the above, prosecutors, all of the above, a variety of actors that operate within the criminal justice system.
And I had another question. I don't know if it was like figure number 5, perhaps. There was it was the disparity between white versus black and Hispanic. I think it was the arrests, which were 6 times higher than. Yes, that one. Searched. Okay, it was the search thing. And I guess I was wondering is this a even experience scenario by the actors, or is this, what I'm wondering is, in the process of choosing to search, what percentage or what is the influence of previous arrest record when the stop's being made and the license plate is being scanned that influences this? Are we finding that there are the histories of certain drivers are more likely to preclude them to become searched?
That's a great question. And I would expect that that's the case. I also suspect that the evidence suggests that the history that one would pull up when looking at a particular driver is itself going to be informed by their past experiences with the criminal justice system, which the evidence suggests there's no pure history. So it's a reinforcing and
so anybody who has misstepped once is likely to be treated with the expectation that the second misstep is just as grievous or more so than a person who has not yet appeared on the records. Yeah.
Yes.
Eric.
So I have a question, but I want to frame the question first based on my and Naomi's experiences, because we had 3 sons. One child by birth, a young man a son who came to us from Korea, and an adopted African American child. And so we experienced through them how each of them was treated everywhere they went. Stores, schools, wherever. And what you say statistically and your interpretation rings absolutely true to me, and I think Naomi would say the same thing. The only explanation for the disparities we saw was a systematic bias or prejudice, that people entered into interactions with our boys with preconceptions of who they were and what they were like. So I guess I have a simple question. What's the answer? How do we fix it?
Eric, I wish that was a simple question. I think that we're fortunate in this community to have folks on campus who make their life's work, or at least make their current research work, like people like Helen Neville, working with police and providing training that, as Mr. Roberts pointed out, there are many actors who are involved in the process, but the police figure prominently because they're the gatekeepers. And I think that providing training on implicit bias and related matters to police is absolutely one essential step. Unfortunately, my expertise, as you know, lies mostly with those who are caught up in the system and then end up in prison. So I'm not the best person to consult on remedies, but I do know that the work that Helen Neville has been doing with the Police Training Institute on campus is nationally watched and seems to be very promising.
Dennis.
And then it's almost more of a concern to me to feel, if this information is correct, that there is a serious bias in the judicial level, which would perhaps be the assignment of punishment or sentencing, because we don't have a way of regulating those decisions. We can regulate our police because we have training for them and they're our employees. But at these higher levels, inconsistencies in fairness can only be corrected by scrupulous observance of results and perhaps voting at the next election, either for or against retaining of an individual who has a certain record. So I'm wondering we'll be doing what we can, of course. We are concerned about that here, but I see that it's not the full solution.
I have a long-term sense of hopefulness about the judiciary because I think in law school, law professors or law school curriculum is more attuned to these concerns. It's a very long-term solution. Today's law students won't be judges, those few that will be judges, for another 30 or 40 years. But it does give me some reason to hope. Also, the judiciary do attend training, do attend professional development, do attend conferences. So there are opportunities for them to continue to grow and learn and reflect on their practices.
Well, it's good to hear. I didn't know that the judges also had peer training. But also I appreciate the fact that a change in consciousness in a community is an evolution and it takes a while. And I do see, I have a sense that younger people today are more demanding for justice than they were 20 years ago. Okay. And not since perhaps when I was younger, when we were demanding justice for a lot of different reasons perhaps. But yes, there's been more thoughtful conversation in the youth today than there has been before.
Mayor?
Yeah, we just approved a resolution, I think it was last week, about keeping the Police Training Institute here, because they did start this implicit bias training. And the big problem in Chicago, where they've had a lot of difficulties, is that the training was not up to date. They were using 30-year-old training films and not teaching officers to de-escalate things or teach them about implicit bias. But I also wanted to ask you about that graph that you showed in time where there was a sudden surge. What do you think precipitated that huge increase at that point in time?
That's the stuff of my 2-hour lecture on campus, but I can condense it to a 30-second response, which is to say a variety of different factors, including but not limited to the war on drugs, 3 strikes you're out, the reduction of sentencing discretion for judges, the women's movement in the 1970s, which criminalized some behavior which had not previously been criminalized, appropriately so, right? It used to be not considered criminal to, for example, engage in domestic violence. But the success of the women's movement did have repercussions, which we are unwise to ignore. The reaction to the civil rights movements and civil rights gains of the 1960s, and a variety of other things. It was a perfect storm, as they say, that gave rise to the numbers.
Eric.
Were racial disparities as pronounced prior to that big spike as they were subsequently?
That's a great question. It's hard to find the data. We know that African Americans and other minorities were overrepresented in American jails and prisons even prior to the American Revolution. In colonial America, they're overrepresented. And I have looked but haven't been able to find the data to give me confidence in saying whether or not the disparities were as pronounced or how they have waxed and waned over the past 2 centuries. So the short answer is I don't know, but have always been there.
Mike?
Okay. So one of the things that I didn't hear you mention about this graph that we're looking at right now is, and maybe it's among the other things, quote unquote, that you didn't elaborate on. Do you think that the war on poverty and the subsequent enactment of social welfare programs of this time period also maybe had an impact?
That's an interesting question. In the reading I've done, and this is not my original research, this is all me in my scholarly hat reading other people's original research.
Sure.
I haven't seen the war on poverty, I haven't seen an argument that the war on poverty in particular played a role. Can you say more about what you were thinking about? Maybe there are other some dynamics.
Well, some people believe that the proliferation of social welfare programs over the last 60 years has actually been a factor in increasing crime because it depresses communities, because it depresses opportunity, because it fosters dependence, and therefore increases crime in certain neighborhoods and communities.
Thank you. So that's an important point to clarify, that this is a rate of growth of incarceration, not the rate of growth in crime, and that the rate of growth in incarceration and in crime do not parallel one another.
Well, but I think they definitely have a relevance to each other. I mean, there's no question.
Well, there is a question, though, and I wish I brought that slide in, that in fact the rate of crime drops during this period as the rate of incarceration continues to rise. And I'm happy to leave both these slides with you and to provide others along with the footnotes if that would be useful for continued conversation on the council's part.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could email those to us.
Okay.
And maybe the supplemental ones too, please.
Okay.
And then with regard to traffic stops, one of the things that continues to concern me is this focus on disparity when we are not at the same time seeming to realize that there is a black-on-black crime problem in this community and in communities across the country. So I think we have a fine police force here. I think we have a very good, a very sensitive police force. I think, well, so Esther Patt talking about some of her observations, clearly not a conservative here in the community, but a very thoughtful person, and she has the fortitude to submit that the police are doing a fine job in the interactions that she has seen them in helping people. So this whole notion that there is a disparity in traffic stops and that it is strictly a bias, to me is problematic because we have a tremendous black-on-black crime problem in this community, and so the police are tasked with solving crimes which in many, many cases in this community are perpetrated by black offenders trying to solve these crimes on behalf of black victims. And so I'm not so sure that the bias, quote unquote, is negative. It is positive in that they are trying to solve a crime of a a victim of a known skin color. It's a frustrating thing to me as an average white guy who has not had to go through what a lot of black folks have had to go through in this community. So it's a hard thing for me to sit here and say this. It really is. But it's frustrating to me, it's vexing to me in a community that I love to continue to hear about a police department that I think does an outstanding job, is trying to solve crimes committed by blacks on other blacks in this community, and that's somehow a bad thing, that it's happening at a disproportionate rate. So that's my difficulty as an average white guy in this community, and a business owner in this community, and a person who lives in this community. That's the struggle that I have in this whole conversation. And I'm glad to hear all sides of it, and I'm finally saying something, but this is it's a real struggle that I have. I feel like they are doing a fine job of trying to solve crime. You look at the top 50 offenders in the Champaign-Urbana community, not one is white. Not one of the top 50 violent offenders identified by Champaign-Urbana police is white. So there's a bias for a reason, and we need to get to the root of that. And I think that's why I brought up the question about social welfare programs and these kind of things, because I think the policies of our governments have made it such that they diminish opportunity. And when opportunity is diminished, guess what happens? People resort to things that they would not otherwise do. So I think really what we need to start worrying about more is not who's getting pulled over for what, but how are we going to fix creating more opportunity, making family a focus once again, support for children and education, all of those kind of things that holistically need to be looked at to make this community, this nation, prosperous once again. And so I don't think it's just an argument about what are the police doing, what is the criminal justice system doing. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had about what's going on overall, what is leading to these outcomes. And it's not corrupt police overall. It's not bad judges. It's not horrible prosecutors. It's that we've had a breakdown in society that has led to this situation. I'm not saying that there aren't bad actors in the criminal justice arena, but that's not the root of this problem, in my humble opinion.
It's not the root of the problem, in my opinion, either. I'm here as a professor of education, so I will be the first to agree with you that we need to look at education. We need to look at a variety of other factors. Right. And we need to look at the performance of the actors in the criminal justice system. I was asked to speak about that, and so that's what I presented on. And I appreciate the widening of the discussion, because if we're going to create a healthy, vibrant, compassionate community, we have to look in many, many directions.
No, I appreciate that. And this wasn't really directed at you. It was just more to try. I think we ought to broaden the conversation, and I appreciate your contribution to this. I really do. It is enlightening. It helps me. This is I don't expect people to believe this, but it's a difficult conversation for all of us. You know, even those of us who don't live it. You know, it's a hard conversation because this is all of our community. So I really do appreciate what you're providing here. And again, this wasn't necessarily directed to you. It's just, I think we all need to speak our piece in this, and hopefully we come to some kind of way forward to improve our community.
Okay, Eric, then Dennis.
I'm going to say something that I didn't intend to say, but I think it's relevant in the context of what was just said. My son got into an argument with a white kid on a basketball court in a park. The other kid went back to his car, got a baseball bat, and attacked my boy. Sent him to the emergency room with a concussion. Assault with a deadly weapon. Could have been killed. The judge gave him a plea to a misdemeanor. The kid and his friend went skipping down the courthouse steps, high-fiving each other. And I'll tell you what it feels like when you can't protect your son from that kind of miscarriage. So, listen to the human side of it, Mike.
Well, as to bring it into the very specific local scene, I'm very pleased that we have now initiated a process by which we can more exactly determine causes and effect during traffic stops, as the checkpoints sheets are now accumulating real useful data to determine whether this community has as large a problem in discriminatory actions as perhaps the national curve. And some of the data you shared with us may be not so much regional as national. We do hope, we're perhaps hopeful that our local experience is not as sharply dividing. But we don't really know where we stand yet, but perhaps within 8 to 12 months we will have real data on the ground from our own experiences and be able to assess our activities and our solutions more strongly.
Okay. Aaron?
So, Dr. Ginsburg, thank you so much for all of your work. The Education Justice Project is something that is amazing and outside of the box, because all of us are human beings and we make mistakes, or we do things on purpose out of anger and for whatever reason. And I do believe that you are working on the remedy, or part of the remedy, because when we know better, I believe that we do better. When we are more informed about our society, I think we have a greater tendency to take advantage of opportunities that may exist. And so the work that you're doing and all the people you have inspired, all of the students who have gone on to become productive members right here in this community, it's nothing short of remarkable in my eyes. The information that you presented at the MLK program this past weekend, it was an honor to serve on that with you. But I appreciate the scholarly work in whatever field that the scholars are in, because you're able to dig into the information in ways that many of us just skim the surface of, right? So I just wanted to thank you for coming, and I know that you got a lot more information. I saw the presentation that you did at the high school, and it was to do this in 10 minutes I know that's hard for you. You have so much information. And I don't necessarily have any particular questions. There are some things that I pulled out that I certainly appreciate. I wanted you to know, and maybe there's a way to connect some of these things, but right over at the IMC, from 6 to 7:30, Representative Ammons, Representative Elaine Neckritz, Bill Programs Not Jails, and First Followers were presenting on fines and fees and what that impact is. And I listened to a young lady read off what her charge was, and then not the fine that was associated with it, but $1,300 worth of fees that were associated with it. So I believe your work helps me and helps others understand the impact, the ripple effect on families, on communities, at every stage, for every actor, whether it's the police, judges, the people who are committing the particular crime. There's a ripple effect for everyone. So just some of the information I wanted to make sure that I was clear on. The rate of incarceration that those in your field or scientists in this field say is a quote-unquote healthy number per 100. What is that number again?
100 per 100,000. That's not personally a number that I support, can put my heart behind, but it is the standard rate at which experts in criminology believe a society can operate healthily. For example, Canada's rate is 118 per 100,000. Pardon me? Canada's rate is 118 per 100,000, which is much closer to 100 than our rate. There are many nations in Western Europe which have rates in the 60s and 70s per 100,000. So for those who are committed to penal incarceration as a response to criminal wrongdoing, many believe we should be aiming for a rate of about 100 per 100,000.
And the reason why I raised that, because you said, and this is one of the things that I think it's difficult sometimes it was difficult for me early on, and I think may be difficult for other people to understand that the studies and the data show that in each ethnic group, people are committing crimes at about the same rate. And you asked the question at the Urbana High School, do we think people in these other countries are fairer and nicer people? And you pointed out there was a reason why there was a difference in this per capita, this incarceration. Could you illuminate
thank you.
that,
And that's
please?
also a response to the mayor's question. Another factor in the increased rate of incarceration starting in the early 1970s was the criminalization of acts that had previously been considered felonies, which is to say, acts for which an actor would have previously received a fine or probation now carried a mandatory sentence of prison time because the act was no longer defined as a misdemeanor but was defined as a felony. So many acts were criminalized during the 1970s into the 1980s, and is another reason that for the event of mass incarceration in the United States. Another is, now I'm on a roll, this is the last thing I'll say though, is that longer prison sentences were imposed. So it's not just the matter that people were, more people were in prison, but more people were in prison longer. And people, as you probably know, talk about the aging of the American incarcerated population and the costs of managing an aging incarcerated population.
You spoke of a punitive approach as opposed to a different approach that are used in other places. And just lastly, if you could just speak to that briefly, please.
Yeah, one of the reasons that criminalization of acts that had formed, and that's pointed at in the criminalization of acts that used to be considered misdemeanors. Criminal acts, by definition, for the most part, carry terms of penal incarceration. And penal incarceration, especially as it's been practiced in the United States since the 1960s, is not taken to be a rehabilitative act. It's taken, oh, thank you so much, Libby.
Thank you,
That's
Libby.
nice of you. Penal incarceration is not taken to be rehabilitative. That is, we say we don't put people in prison because we hope to change their ways, to help them grow exposed to new approaches and to educate them or to learn, teach them how to do better. Is to incapacitate and to deter others, to incapacitate them and to deter others, which is all caught up with a punitive approach, a punishment approach. We want to pay them back. We want to show them. In other nations, the approaches are more, Finland, for example, Germany, the approaches are more explicitly rehabilitative. So the response to wrongdoing is not, how can we punish, how can we show an example, make an example to other people, but how can we help this individual in front of us to make better choices, to have expanded opportunity, to make more of his potential. And the response is typically not incarceration, but job training programs, community service, required continuing education, required adult education, participation in therapeutic programs like anger management or counseling programs. These are the sorts of sentences that courts in Europe are in the position of providing to criminal defendants, and it not only reduces the incarcerated population, obviously, but produces healthier outcomes for those who undergo those sentences. So I didn't talk about recidivism. I can talk about that. Recidivism in the United States is terribly high, 47% in Illinois. We have one of the highest recidivism rates in the country. Recidivism rates, which refer to the rates at which people who have been convicted of criminal activities return to prison, are much lower in the teens and lower in many other European nations.
Mayor, then Bill.
I wondered, we call them correctional institutions. Were they ever correctional institutions in this country, or did they start out doing the right thing and then sort of slowly deteriorate? Or has Europe just been ahead of us the whole time?
I'm trying to condense, again, my lecture on this subject into a 30-second. I think that the modern prison was basically invented in the United States in the early 19th century, and I think the desire at that point was very earnest and sincere to correct behavior, although the term correctional institution doesn't arise until the mid-20th century. But the desire at that point was to rehabilitate. They invented solitary cells, a regime of silence, the imposition, the requirement that people spend long periods of time by themselves, engaged in learning a trade and prayer and self-reflection. It didn't work. There are many awful outcomes associated with that regime, but the sincere intent, I like to believe, was to help people reform their hearts and their souls. That was the wrong way to go about doing it. We had lots of responses to the rehabilitative impulse dating from beginning from the early 19th century until around the mid-20th century, when there was a famous article, I'm sorry to sound so professorial, but a famous article called What Works came out in the early 1970s. And many people credit the publication of that article by a criminologist named Martinson with the decline of the rehabilitative impulse, and we've never recovered it. Although there are attempts here in Illinois, I will say, to go back in that direction. Martinson argued in his article, which was widely disseminated at the time. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine and Newsweek and all sorts of the appearances in the popular press. His argument was nothing works. What works to rehabilitate criminals, he said, nothing works. And he went through a variety of different programs, from Alcoholics Anonymous to counseling to behavior modification. He said nothing has been proven to work. Now, of course, subsequent scholars have proven him wrong, but that was his argument. People, for a variety of reasons, political actors found it attractive, and there was a very explicit disavowal of rehabilitation as the proposed purpose of penal incarceration. Instead, the turn was to what we still find ourselves in today, deterrence, incapacitation, retributivism, a more punitive turn.
Bill.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up these last points about like mandatory sentences and things like that that really extended the time, which carries over year to year, so then you get that spike too because people are in there longer. I know a lot of that is also politically motivated or politically accepted and encouraged, thinking of the Willie Horton type things where it's just too easy to campaign on somebody getting out of jail and doing something and say, look, our policies cause that, so we have to change that. They have to stay in jail longer. So I'm glad people like you are standing up, and hopefully we'll stand up to those kind of political challenges when people bring them up. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for the education you're doing on that, and hopefully people won't fall for that quite as much anymore. I do have a question about one of the ratios. If you could go to the slide that showed the total disparity between African Americans in the
the last one?
Let's see.
Oops. Sorry.
In the incarceration disparity between African Americans and whites, or is that it?
I think is that it?
Okay, so that's about.
The actual number in this chart is 275 whites, 1,408 blacks, and I don't recall the number. It's like about 390.
Like 5 times, basically.
It's a little over 5 times.
Okay. Because I was looking at the later ratios for the criminal, where you broke out the ratios independently. I kind of calculated, multiplied those together, came up with like 3.3. So the would you say the criminal justice part that you've identified anyway makes up maybe 2/3 of the impact of the difference in incarceration rates, and there's some other third maybe from other social things that we haven't identified yet?
I don't know if I can put a number value on it, but certainly I tried to be clear that it's not simply this. So I would feel comfortable.
Okay, I like round
ballparking
numbers
it
and ballpark figures, so
Yeah,
I'm going to think of
ballparking.
it like that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan.
Would one of the contributing factors, at least in Illinois, be that prison construction was viewed as an economic development tool, especially if you drive around western and southern Illinois? It was a major tool in the 1980s, I think, and early 90s probably. So I'm assuming that trend has stopped.
I believe it has. And we've seen prison closings in the last few years.
Yeah,
in
so we're
Illinois.
we're starting to reverse that.
Yeah. And we also see, I hope people are familiar with the Life Skills Prison that is intending to open soon. It's a little open already in Kewanee, which shifts. This is why I say in Illinois we're seeing a hopeful promise of a different sort of approach to incarceration. The Life Skills Prison in Kewanee, used to be a youth detention center, is focused on providing education and job skill training and emotional support to people who will be re-entering into the community, focused on life skills rather than punitive approach of just locking people up. The idea, from what I understand, is that it's supposed to be something like a college campus in which people who are incarcerated there can have a variety of different programs that they can choose from, and they'll go to the programs during the day, work on self-improvement. It's one of the only sorts of facilities like this in the country. So when it does open, I expect a lot of attention will be, it'll be given a lot of attention, and I hope there'll be a lot of good research coming out of that.
And that's in Kewanee?
In Kewanee, which I guess is outside of Chicago. I actually don't know exactly where Kewanee is, but it's up north. Where is it?
Northwest of Peoria.
Northwest of Peoria, okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your questions and your time.
Charlie, I don't have another question. I just wanted to say something in relationship to this. One of the things that I witnessed early on in this conversation, or in this discussion, is that, as Dr. Ginsburg pointed out, what were very clear racially, I wouldn't necessarily say motivated, right? But there were very clear racial disparities, right? And I could feel the tension in the room, right, as those things are being pointed out. And I understand that it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. We all know the history of our country. And I don't think anyone wants to be seen or spoken of as racist or sexist or any of those particular things. It seems it's uncomfortable, it's painful. And so I understand when I hear what I hear after the tension subsides. I don't hear my white colleagues, brothers and sisters, speaking to the racial disparities. What I typically hear is maybe it's something else. Maybe it's the prisons that were being built. Maybe it was the social programs in our country that's built, and the fabric of it is racial prejudice, in actuality, white supremacy. How do we sit here today and act as if it plays no role in the outcomes that we see today? So I don't say that to say that any of you are racist or bad people or any of that. But it wouldn't be wise of me to sit here as a male, even as a black male, and act as if I have not been saturated with sexism in a patriarchal and a male-dominated society. So I don't expect that any of you have escaped being saturated with racist views or stereotypes or prejudice or implicit bias. And it's going to play out at some point. And so I just think we need to speak to that and address those things, and then we might actually be able to build a healthy relationship. And I just wanted to point out that as you talked about the different places and how they are viewing prisons and how they handle it in Europe and places like that. When I listen to Esther Pat's story and I see officers go that extra mile to put themselves in danger, like the story that was told a few weeks back about the officer who had a gun pulled on him and he didn't shoot and kill someone, I can't help but to have an immense appreciation and respect for that, regardless of whether the person is white or black, right? But in my experience, and in many of the people in my community, the experience is we have 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 opposite experiences to contrast to that 1 or 2, right? And the racial, quote-unquote, profiling is one of the biggest pieces for us. It really does contribute and impact the way that we see our police officers. And so for me to represent predominantly African-American ward and to represent myself as an African-American, to hear the response but not hear the implicit bias or to address that's there seems like a dismissal to me. And that's painful. And that doesn't make me feel or my community feel as though we are being heard and that we are part of a solution going forward. So I just wanted to share that. I'll have more comments, I'm sure, when we get on this topic of the hiring the more police officers. But I think this was, I think what you have done has been tremendous here tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time, and again, appreciate all the work that you do. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, Ben Jocelyn, when did you want to speak?
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Dr. Ginsburg. That was very enlightening. And it feels sort of, and thank you for your most recent words there, Alderperson Aarons. It feels sort of silly to speak toward some of these issues after you did, because you did so eloquently. But there are just a couple things that got brought up during that last conversation that I also, because they've now been put into the records of the City Council, just sort of want to address, because it is a very difficult conversation, and I so appreciate people's sort of engaging in the subject, because as we know more, as we know better, we can do better. I think that's a really good principle, and it's, you know, as we feel certain ways about things, it's easy to get caught up in feelings and personal experience, and also in the media that we're saturated in. And a couple of things like black on black crime, which is something that I've heard a lot and appealed to me at one point in my life in terms of understanding, because I'd heard it so many times. And then I read some pieces that talk about, well, you know what? White on white crime is actually very likely. Most crime that happens to white people is perpetuated by white people. So you hear black on black crime, and you hear that most crime that happens to African American people is, you know, black on black crime. It's this media sensationalistic term that grabs hold in people's emotional centers and gets held on to, and we get this idea that the black people are killing themselves off and we need to come in and fix it. Well, you know, the statistics show that white people are also the people who kill white people, and you don't hear about white on white crime. You hear about black on black crime. The fact that the list of the top 50 criminals in our police system are all African American shouldn't be used as evidence that we are investigating necessary crime, but instead should be used as evidence that we got a racist system, if not and it doesn't have to be just the police, but the fact that socioeconomic factors, etc., have led to, I mean, whether it be that poverty has led down that road or profiling that has led down that road, there are so many factors that contribute to the fact that the top 50 criminals are all African American should be a blazing sign that we have a problem. And the way that we, so, and then again in the traffic stops, even if we see that a history of being pulled over is being used to rationalize a search, the fact that there's a historical record of stopping people because of their color, someone who's been pulled over because they're black before, then gets searched the second time they're pulled over because they've been pulled over before, is a perpetuation of a racist system. And then, once again, to talk about humanizing it all, I'm a substitute teacher in the Rantoul City Schools. I walked down the hall today, and I watched the teachers smile and say hello to a bunch of the white kids, who are a minority of the population there. And I picked up a young black boy, probably for the first time in his life. The way he glowed today, just carrying him around the halls and showing him love and the expectation that he might succeed, right? You see those posters of the expectation that is carried by society because of these statistics, right? You see statistics that say, what? In some areas, 50% of black males in this country have felony charges. That becomes the expectation. So it's our role as a society to say, we don't want that to be true, to put in place social systems, social programs to make that not the case here. And while we want our police to be the best, I mean, yeah, I really want our police to be the best, and I'm so glad that we are supporting them and giving them the training, and that they are becoming educated in trying to de-escalate. Like, I believe that we have a better than average police force, and I am so grateful for that, and I want that to continue. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But I also do want the response not to be, well, I think we're better, but instead to be, how can we be the very best, right? It shouldn't be, well, what are the things we're doing right? It should be, how can we make this most right? How can we cherish people throughout their lives to make this as good a community as we can have? So I thank you very much for your time and for engaging in this subject. Thank you.
Questions for Ben? Thanks, Ben.
Oh, sorry. I also wanted to mention that in terms of the war on poverty and that's impact, we also saw a statistic that was provided by Rebecca Ginsburg that showed 1940s having no spike in the criminal justice system. Instead, it was in the 70s and 80s, and that was not when we developed the welfare state in the 1940s with the Civilian Conservation Corps and similar programs, when white people generally benefited greatly from social welfare. Instead, that remained constant, if not dipped low, whereas now social welfare programs, I think there's not statistical evidence to show that social welfare leads to laziness and crime, but instead I think it leads to people being well taken care of. And the one chart that doesn't show a spike when we establish the social welfare state, I think, forwards that point.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, next up, a staff report. Libby?
Good evening. I am still pushing the age-friendly survey for folks who are 50 or better. I have paper copies I brought tonight. I'll pass these around, but there's some in the back, and there's a phone number for somebody who can come pick it up, or I'd be happy to bring it to campus as well. We've got almost 400 responses, but we're looking for more responses and a greater diversity in the respondents. So again, if you know somebody who might want to fill out the survey, it doesn't take very long. Thank you very much.
Diane.
What's the web? Where do they find it on the web again?
I didn't bring that with me.
Is it on the city's website?
But it's at the CHAD is a research group, so if they go to CHAD and then look up Champaign-Urbana age-friendly community,
okay,
they will find that.
Eric.
That's
I-
Community Health, Aging, and Disability Center, the Center for Health, Aging, and Disability on campus.
So I started it online, but I had no meaningful input because they say, can you get here? Can you get there? Is it friendly enough? Sure, 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 no problem. So it would be just like totally, I would be telling you, you were perfect, but you're probably not perfect. There are other people who have more limited mobility than I, who, you know, am fortunate enough to have, who might be able to actually tell you something interesting. So I guess I have to admit I didn't finish it.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Mayor? Oh, Mayor, and then Bill. Oh, report from the mayor. Okay, Bill first. Then.
Okay. On your desk is an announcement for a gathering to discuss homelessness at St. Patrick's Parish Center this coming Sunday, January 29th from 2 to 3:30. There will be a group of local pastors, service providers, government agencies, and people with experiences with homelessness about what we know of homeless in Champaign County. And this Thursday night, I believe, is still scheduled the annual, or every other year maybe, point-in-time survey of homeless. Those statistics will come out later in the year, but that's what the main gauge is, the one night a year in the winter.
Okay. Mayor?
Okay, I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors in Washington, and there was a discussion about New York City. I told you about this last November. The First Lady, Chirlane McCray. They're training lay people in New York City to be first aid for mental health. We have a lot of discussion about crisis training for police officers, but also there are other countries that are training lay people, and New York City is doing it. So I think that when we're talking about investing in mental health, that would be something that we should consider. And the mayor of Denver was talking about how they have social workers in the police cars. They have all their officers trained on crisis intervention. So anyway, those are two things that I picked up. Plus, we had a United States senator from Texas who gave a very good talk, and he was mentioning that the gasoline tax has been insufficient. And I wanted to say, well, yes, if you don't change it for 20 years, it could easily end up being insufficient. So that'll lead into what I have to talk about in the next agenda item.
Anyone else? Okay. The next agenda item is resolution number 2017-1001R, resolution in favor of sustainable funding for 9/11 systems. Mayor?
Okay, I went to the commission that is charged with changing the law that is going to expire on July 1st about 911, and I'd like to change what I had originally proposed. I was talking about the fact that our voters had approved $1.50 per landline, and how that sort of deteriorated in terms of revenue production because of the introduction of cell phones and the fact that we have inflation. And so a greater and greater burden has fallen on to the cities, the county, and the university to fund our MetCAD system. I pointed out that Chicago has $2.50, had $200.50. They now have $3.90, but all the rest of the state has been reduced to 87 cents. So that's why we are asked to pay a bigger and bigger burden, and it's unsustainable. And so rather than saying we should have a fixed dollar amount, I think we need to have a percentage. And that would be something that could keep up with inflation, because if you pick a number, whatever it is, and you keep it in place for 20 years, it's obviously not going to be workable after all that time. Whereas a percentage of the bill would keep up with inflation, and also, I believe, would be less regressive, because people with smaller phone bills would pay a smaller amount rather than having everybody pay the same amount. So if you want to consider this, I would like you to consider the revised version. I've handed out a copy of it to everybody. I don't even have a copy left myself. Anybody have any questions on it or any ideas for how to improve it?
Dan.
Just had a question. This seems to imply that we actually don't know how many phones are in a particular county in use. Is that right?
Right. I got that from Ralph Caldwell. I mean, I think we could estimate it, but that's one of the problems, is that we don't really have the basic information. And I don't want to get information on which phone company has how many customers. I don't think that's what we want. But I'm just asking, in order for us to pick a reasonable percentage, we should base it on what our dollar needs are now and pick a percentage based on what we think would generate those dollars. And to do that, you need to know how many phones and what their bills are. Not individual bills, but the totals. So it wouldn't be proprietary information, but just enough. And the woman who's in charge of 911 statewide works for the state police, and she is going to be holding meetings around the state. But I think whenever you change a state law, you really need to look and talk to the people that are going to be affected. And that's why I'm saying I want a bunch of different counties and cities to weigh in on this and what makes sense for them. Because to have 87 cents for the rest of the state and $3.90 for Chicago is not particularly sensible in my view.
And with over 50,000 students in Champaign County between the U of I and Parkland, a lot of those phones that are in use here are actually being billed up there. So
right.
Yeah.
But even if we can't fix that, I'm not looking for necessarily perfect. I would like to get to perfect, but we might just have to settle for excellent, which is my usual standard. So if we could just get who's paying us now to pay a better, more reasonable fee, then we'd be better off, because we wouldn't have to keep paying more and more every year into MetCAD. And MetCAD needs it, but the sheriff's department, the sheriff said he couldn't hire officers because his MetCAD bill was so high. So I'd appreciate your support and your ideas on this. But this is just to begin a push to get a big discussion going statewide.
Bill, then Eric.
Yeah, I think this is an improvement over the original. I was trying to estimate myself how many phones there might be, so I looked up like national per capita figures. There's almost one cell phone per capita now in the U.S. Apparently people, like our staff probably have more than one cell phone because they have their personal one and maybe one for the city and things like that. So some people have two, other people, a few people, 5% of the people still don't have a cell phone. I think there's 35 to 40% of the landlines are still in existence. So you can estimate, and what worried me when I did that was each household would have 3 or 4 phones, and then you'd be adding somewhere between $90 and $120 per year to their tax burden, and that would be very regressive. So that's if you went with the original suggestion of $2.50 per phone per month. That would be very regressive and a pretty steep increase, and I would not support allowing an unelected board to just apply that across the county without any kind of referendum. I do think a percentage would make more sense. I know we have a local telecommunications tax, so we must already have an idea of something about, at least in Urbana, what our total bills are, because we could look at the telecommunications tax and back that out, I think. And Champaign probably has the same, but we do need probably, I guess, a county-wide number. And you know, there's just some details about how would you do the voice over IP things that people pay one price for, and
yeah, there already is a fee because they gave us their financial results, and VoIP was one of them. So, but I just think we have to start looking at it, and I could certainly estimate it too. You could just have a number of all the population minus the students and get a rough idea. But I think we should really understand it better, because you know, coming up with 87 cents for the whole state is just really unsustainable, and I think we need to act pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think this is fair. I can support this, or I did support one that just asked them to raise the 87-cent fee and still distribute the money. But I know that there's danger of sweeps and things like that when you leave things in the hands of the state. It seemed like there was one other thing I wanted to mention, but I guess that's that covers most of it. But yeah, yep, I think that was it. Okay, thanks.
Eric?
A technical question, and I don't know how a particular cell phone is tied to a particular geographic location.
The billing.
By the billing address.
Yeah, right.
Oh, so for example, I mean, if like I know somebody who calls me fairly frequently who lives here, but every time it comes up on the phone, it says it's coming from Atlanta, because that's the area code on the phone. But the fact that the bill is being paid out of here ties the phone to here. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's correct, but I don't know all the answers. I'm just trying to get the discussion going and getting the local governments to talk to their state representatives so that we can get some action on this and get something better than what we have now.
Aaron?
So the percentage, it says 911 systems be allowed to charge a percentage of each monthly bill.
You have
Is
to
there
read
a
the
cap?
second one. It's the second one also to determine what it would be. And this is just to get information out there so we can come up with a better law.
Yeah, I'm just
It's not
wondering
a
if there was
final
a
decision.
Is there some sort of cap of that already exists? Is there some statute that says you can only?
It says 87 cents. That's the current law.
That's the only thing.
And
so, Bill, what does that
$3.90.
translate to percentage?
You know, I just think we're just not getting enough money right now. Every year we have to kick in more and more. And it was set up to be a system that was mostly financed by the users. And it was set up before cell phones were used by everyone. So it's an outdated system and it needs to be brought up to date and have a mechanism to stay up to date.
Okay.
Mike?
Well, as I said at the previous meeting where we discussed this issue, I do absolutely agree with you in concept. The great reduction in landlines over time has obviously made a major impact, and it is a user-based service. I don't necessarily think the taxpayers of Urbana should have to long-term subsidize this service from other funds, and that's what's happening now. That said, I agree with a lot of Bill's points. I was going to raise the same. My research shows that on average nationwide, and I don't know if this applies to a college town like we're in or not, but it's about 3 phones per household today is the nationwide average. Whether that holds up, do you count a dorm room as one residence or is the entire dorm a residence? I don't know how that works. But I know that I have 5 phones on my bill. I have, I have 5 cellular devices on my bill, 2 of them with a different area code. So yeah, I think they would all be billed here. But I do think some kind of equitable situation where the users are paying for a service which they would greatly benefit from in an emergency is only fair. But yeah, the devil's in the details. So conceptually, I'm there, and I think we ought to continue to keep working on it and advocate to our state legislators to acknowledge the reality in the market and to come up with a system that equitably funds 911 systems.
Okay, so my question is this ready for council with these changes? Eric?
So I would make a suggestion for really dramatic simplification, and that is I would just fold this over. I would just start it with, whereas fair and sustainable funding is vital to maintain 911 systems, and whereas fixed dollar and so forth. And I would cut out all the whereases above that, because the history, our history, and Chicago's history, and all of that is really not relevant. What's really relevant is fair and sustainable funding is vital. Fixed dollar amount is not the way to go. And so we believe that 911 systems should be allowed to charge a percentage of each monthly phone bill. So I'd be happy to support it if it began, whereas fair and sustainable funding is vital to maintain, et cetera.
Well, I want to put the history in because that's where the problem's coming from, and I want them to understand that the 87 cents needs to be changed, and it needs to be changed quickly. So that was my rationale, and it's going to be different for some other community, and they can write it however they want, or I'm just trying to get the discussion going, and
Yeah.
I think most people don't know what the history is, so that's why I put the history in. And I also think it's a bit bizarre to have $3.90 for one city and 87 cents for the rest of the state. And so I'm trying to point out the inequity in the current system.
Okay.
Eric?
So the point that I'm trying to make is based on the idea that we really want this to be paid attention to. We want it to be paid attention to by a whole bunch of people who voted for the current system, and telling them that they must have had a screw loose or something like that is not likely to win them over.
Bill?
I did think of I wanted to mention that the 50,000 college students, some of them probably do have their phone going to their address, the grad students, international students, so you can't write off all of them. And we do currently have the ability to ask for a referendum if we wanted to add $2. That's part of the current law.
I don't think it is.
I'm pretty sure it is.
I think they
it's about a
took
100-page law, and I skimmed through it. But
Okay, my understanding was they took away the referendum possibilities, and they just did a flat fee of 87 cents. And if I'm wrong, I'd be happy to be wrong.
Okay, we could
but,
check. We
you
could
know,
check
another
that.
possibility is just to base it on population. But as I said, this is not to be a finished product. This is to give people a perspective of what the problem is and to start to approach a better solution.
Okay. Yeah, and we could check the referendum. That'd be easy enough to ask the METCAD people. I kind of agree with Eric, actually, about this City of Chicago stuff. We know that Chicago gets unequal treatment in almost every bill that's written, so by putting that in there, it just seems like, I don't know, you're just jealous of Chicago's taxing ability or something, and they don't have to just apply it to METCAD. They can, in fact, I think I read an article where they're applying it to their pension payments. They aren't restricted like everybody else is. So,
Right,
you know,
but this
there's-
was by the legislature, not by Chicago. I mean, they obviously lobbied for it, but I'm talking about a state law that was so disparate for different parts of the state, which I
Right,
think
like
is
most
part
of them are.
Yeah, which I think is part of the motivation for changing it. But anyway.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. We have 8 more items on the agenda and less than 2 hours to get it done. So I'm going to suggest that a compromise of reducing some of the language, maybe if unless there's a majority that support the language as it is, maybe a simplifying and condensing some of the upper language above the fold that Eric has pointed out might be an easier way to go.
Would you be happy if I got it on one page, Eric?
Look, it isn't a question of making me happy. It's a question of making it, of framing it in a way that the legislature will not be either threatened or insulted or whatever, so that it really has a chance. And I believe completely in what you're advocating. I believe completely that it should be that the 87% fee is inadequate, that the 87-cent fee, that it should be based on a percentage of the bill, and that the percentage should be adjusted to the local system's financial needs. And I think that the more complicated you make the rationale, the more you point to the history of what you believe to be flawed legislation, the less sympathetic a hearing it will get once it gets to Springfield.
Okay, I have a suggestion. I think the whereases 1, 3, and 6 are not insulting. They simply set the tone for why we're doing this. The 2nd, 4th, and 5th, and 7th ones could be reduced down to a sentence, something like, whereas there are various methods of charging across the state, and have led to, I hate to use the word, disparities across the state, or something like that. Some kind of, one sentence historical that summarizes the 4 that I'm chopping out of here. That would be my suggestion to get this done. Mayor.
I will say that when I brought this up at the Illinois Municipal League, when Speaker Madigan was there, the other Mike Madigan, he was really appalled that we couldn't charge what our voters had approved. So it rang very positively with the legislator. But what were the ones that you want to take out? You want to take out
I
2?
think 2, 4, 5, and 7. If you can reduce those down to a simpler
I can do it.
idea.
Yeah, okay, I
think,
can do that.
Is that acceptable to
fine.
folks?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. 2, 4, 5, and 7.
I'd entertain a motion to send that version to council.
Second.
Well, I'll make the motion then.
Well, I'll second the motion.
Moved by Dennis, seconded by Aaron to
do exactly that. Do an edit and then see the edit at our council meeting.
Council meeting in 2 weeks. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is ordinance number 27. I hate when I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Ordinance number 2017-13, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for fiscal year 2016-17. It's 2 police officer positions and crime mapping software. We'll start with a staff report. This is some additional information. Then we have a couple of public comments.
Okay. This is really just a follow-up on 2 items. One was the council's request last week to amend the budget to add 2 police officer positions. And also in some earlier discussions, there was some direction to purchase some additional software for the crime analyst to better evaluate the data that we have. So this budget amendment would increase expenditures in this year's budget by $64,877, but on a recurring basis, an annual basis, it would increase the budget by about $194,000. And so when we add those positions and that software, we have to plan to cover those costs into the future. What I did mention here under the fiscal impact that there is the potential that we would have to make budget reductions next year in order to support those positions. And unfortunately, if we don't have a decision in our favor on the hospital property tax issue, I think that is increasingly likely at this point. However, I want to say I didn't say that to discourage you from making this decision, because it's the council's priorities that will be reflected in the budget, and if necessary, we will work to identify other items that could be cut.
Okay, questions? Eric.
So this is a fiscal impact question, but it might be that Chief Connolly would have to play a role in answering it. Would the addition of these positions be projected to reduce to any significant extent the amount of overtime that police officers are incurring?
If you're referring to the 2 additional officers, again, it's probably going to be 10 months before those officers are even introduced to the police department. Certainly, the more officers that we have, the opportunity to reduce overtime has to be considered. But it would be difficult for me to say if those 2 officers would make a significant impact.
So, yeah, and I understand that there's a significant ramp-up time, but I'm just thinking in the out years on a recurring basis, and having, instead of X officers, X plus 2,
right.
Is it possible to project how much might be saved in overtime costs in the out years?
We could certainly look at that, you know, and I appreciate the addition of 1 officer, but I can tell you that a significant impact would probably be identified with respect to overtime if, for instance, 5 police officers were introduced. the initial request, because with a minimum of 5 officers, it would definitely impact the ability for the police department to look at the shift relief factor and all the other issues that introduce overtime. But 2 could certainly help.
Bill.
Since we just got done talking about MedCat, I know with increased headcount, they base our fees partly on number of officers we have. It probably wouldn't affect this year, but maybe next year. Is that right? It wouldn't be much, I don't think. Might be a few $1,000s.
Yeah, I think the difference is likely to be small, but I'm not sure exactly on what date they take that head count.
Okay. And then just another general comment about possibility of increasing revenue for next year's budget. I know we talked about false alarms before, and we never got any kind of alarm registration in place. I know Champaign has since done that, but they've basically farmed theirs out to a private company that takes pretty big fees from it. So the city makes money, but the people that pay the fees pay a lot more than the city gets. So I guess I'd like to see us work together and look at maybe using the code enforcement software that we have now to see if that could be used for some kind of tracking of false alarms, and maybe just kind of rethink whether it's worth going down that road again to try to get more revenue for covering those false alarms, because those are still pretty high, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, questions now, and I've got two public comments. Diane.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the sales and income tax revenues decrease? How big of a decline are we seeing in that area?
I'm still working on those estimates, and when we publish the quarterly report, I expect to have a more complete update. But between the two, I think we're looking at a revenue shortfall exceeding $500,000
over our budget, compared to our budget?
Compared to our budget, which is what we're
projection.
always comparing to. Yes, and this is not, it's not just an Urbana thing. I mean, that there are weaknesses in those revenues statewide, and in fact, if you haven't looked at the new State of Illinois economic forecast, which was just published, it's very illuminating. But there's weakness in sales tax revenues statewide, and income tax is an issue statewide.
And our hotel tax fell short a couple years in a row too, right?
Yeah, marginally. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head exactly what it was. I don't think it was very alarming, but
okay.
Aaron.
So, when you say budget cuts, are you, because I'm concerned about all of our staff being overwhelmed, any of the departments. So, are you saying that this is a possibility of a reduction in, like, layoffs? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it would always be an option for the council to choose to increase revenues, but if you did not choose to do that and we were forced to reduce the budget, I think we would look first to do that through attrition. Certainly, it would be a last resort to do layoffs. But if we need to balance the budget and we do not have new revenues, then we'll have to find a way to make it happen.
Okay, we have two public comment. Let's see. Jacqueline Hanna doesn't wish to speak, but is in opposition to hiring new police officers until we address racial profiling first. And then Martell Miller wishes to speak.
How you doing, Council? Martin Miller, Banner, Illinois. I'm not anti-police at all, because we need them. But I think we, just like we look at this as we need these police because of these shootings. I've been coming here for 12 years, talking about the community I'm from, about a problem, about racial profiling. We did studies on it. We got another study going on the racial profiling. All we did is to do a study on what the city really needs to deal with poor people. And if we do a study like that, maybe we don't need police. Maybe we need some social workers. Maybe we need some money put somewhere to do other things instead of police officers. And the reason I say that, I look around this town, and I said 5 police officers, police departments. It's actually 6 because we got one at Parkland. How many police do we need per capita per people? We need to look at that, because that it ain't just a banner. A banner goes into Champaign University, goes in on the Champaign side. It ain't like these got jurisdictions, and we got really need to look at that. You know, because of these shootings. What if we don't have these many shootings anymore? Will he still need them police officers? You know, we got to look at where the problem is. You can have a slow leak tire, and you won't fix it if it leaks. It take 2 or 3 weeks to put air in it, because you ain't got to. But if it run out of air every day, that's when you deal with the problem. We doing the reaction. When are we going to become 5 marshals and do a prevention? And I really want to know, and I talk to all the city governments, when are we going to stop reacting to things and do a prevention? But y'all, and then I'm going to say one more thing. And the reason I'm going to say it, because it really bothers me when I hear people talk about black on black crime. And the guy got up and says, it depends where the people at, where the crime going, and who you put the crime on. We never talk about white on white crime. You know, and we need to look at the racial issue. We refuse to talk about the racial issue and the history of racism in America. Aaron brought it up. We won't talk about that part. We leave that to the side until we deal with the real problem. We ain't gonna never solve no problem, because it is racial profiling. It is racism. Everything that you refuse to talk about, we know what happened. It's the elephant in the room. And when you're talking about traffic stops, I done walked outside my house, wasn't a traffic stop. I stayed 2 blocks from here and was approached by the police. Police wasn't called, stopped and engaged me. It wasn't like they called black men walking. I just watched something on Facebook before I come in here by a football player, Ricky Williams, walking around at a hotel in Texas, got stopped for being black. His crime is his skin. My crime is my skin color. Y'all don't experience that. But we don't talk about that and know it's an issue. And I would like for y'all to have a discussion. And they ain't just got to happen in the Banner City Council. We ought to have a community discussion about it and deal with it. But we won't do that. Thank you.
Questions for Martel? Okay, thank you. Okay. What do folks want to do? Bill.
I'll move to send this to council with recommendation for approval.
Second.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Diane to send this to council. Eric.
So, request for more police officers was originally brought to us on the basis of a surge in violent crime, evidence being 4 homicides in 2016. Now, statistics of small numbers are kind of not necessarily reliable. And if I don't have, I can flip a coin that's completely unbiased, and I won't have to make too many flips before I get 4 heads in a row, 5 heads in a row. Now we've gotten more complete information on calls for service from the police department. I don't think that's been posted publicly, but we've all seen it. And what's really clear in those numbers is there hasn't been a surge in violent crime overall. What's happened is that there were a few tragic cases where the shooter was lucky and the shootee was unlucky. But what has been going up clearly over a period from 2011 to 2016, year after year until now, it's way, way, way higher, are police calls where the root of the call is mental health or substance abuse, where it is where the police are called upon for domestic situation, or person is delirious, is a helpless person is in some public situation, and the police have to intervene. And when this discussion started, I was one of the people, in fact, Esther Pat was probably referring to me, who looked on the mental health needs as competing with the needs for police officers. But, and I've been talking to a lot of people, and I'll describe it in a little bit more detail when we get to the mental health resolution that I've asked for. But one of the people, and she's given me permission to quote her, Claudia Lenhoff, who's director of Champaign County Healthcare Consumers, who gave me lots of information about what, current status of efforts to improve access to mental health, but also urged me to support the call, the request for additional police officers on the ground, that they are really stretched out in responding to incidents, responding to situations that are really mental health and substance abuse based. I've also was strongly influenced by the testimony of the police spouses, and I was moved to do some research, go into research literature on effects of stress, and I'm very convinced that long hours, overtime hours in what's already a high stress job to begin with, are going to impinge that person's efficiency and effectiveness in the job, that person's health, that person's relationship with other people off the job, and that there ought to be some relief there. So I originally was feeling sort of combative and wanted to sort of hold this one hostage to the mental health resolution, but I'm not going to do that. I will support it as really being an adjunct to the mental health issue, and that's the story of my, I guess, this hat, which I won't wear because Phyllis says I shouldn't, but I've evolved. So,
Bill, then Dennis, then Aaron, then Diane.
Yeah, I'll just quickly recap. I think what I've said the last couple of times we discussed this, we are requiring more training, the state's requiring more training. I don't think crime has changed that much, our crime situation, but there's definitely more training required, and there's definitely more time being taken with the crisis intervention calls. And I do think that maybe the statistics that we got recently should be put online, since we've been talking about it during the meeting. The reason those numbers have gone up, I don't think it's been so much that those things weren't happening. It's just that now we have the CIT officers, that they call them crisis intervention calls because we have the officers to respond. So we have the officers to respond appropriately and take the time and make sure that people don't automatically go to jail for disturbing the peace or having a domestic disturbance or something like that. Now they are handled appropriately with the crisis intervention officers. But all that takes time, and it does take money. So I do think we'll have to hire these two and get everybody hired on board. That we have a lot of turnover, so we need to get everybody back on board and go from there this year.
The chief just said he would get the report up online, so hopefully we'll get a reference to it tomorrow that we can share. Dennis, then Aaron.
Yeah, I appreciate the reconsideration of the number of police officers that were originally requested, and its reduction to 2, which seems to be a manageable number. And I've heard from officers in conversation that this can also be related to a morale issue in the department. When you have a department that has had a cap or freeze on the number of officers because of the budget constraints over the last several years, and you have several officers who aren't part of the force because of injury, and it reduces the number of officers available, and so it stresses the staff that is present, and there is a lot more pressure, an expectation to step in for overtime is another kind of emotional burden for the community of officers themselves. So I think this is I think we've kind of hit a balance between the original request and the actual needs we have, and the fact that we're going to also be talking about a mental health approach to dealing with incarceration is an important second discussion that's coming up later on. So I'll support this.
So the major concern that I have is from a financial standpoint, first and foremost, that $200,000 recurring every year going forward, when we're still waiting on this Carl decision, and when from the finance director's report, it appears as though we could have to lay off other folks to cover this. And all of that, coupled with the fact that there's actually been no data, no actual presentation that showed a real need for more officers. Of course, folks are throwing out this uptick in violence, but it hasn't, from what I can see, the number of officers we have has nothing to do with that. There's no evidence that shows that the number of officers we have anything to do with the number of violent crimes that take place. So there's no evidence of that. I don't want to belabor that point. And it does not really address the overtime issue. The chief already said that. He said it in the newspaper. He said it again tonight. So to put forth that it actually addresses that, that's false. It doesn't address that. And for folks who are very data-driven, I still have not heard any evidence that says more police officers are going to stop more violent crimes. People who commit crimes wait for the police to leave, and then they commit the crime, and then the police come investigate it. So one of the questions that one of my constituents had is, are we talking about investigators, or are we talking about beat cops? That could make a difference in how people see this. Now, given the presentation that we had earlier tonight, seeing that the police are indeed the first line of defense or the actors in this criminal justice system, again, driving home this point of, I don't know, 12 years ago, as Mr. Miller says, we've been coming to the council and stuff and highlighting racial disparity in traffic stops. And for a decade, we were virtually ignored. Just, no, that couldn't be true. And then finally, there's enough pressure to form a task force. And then the task force says, yeah, there's a disparity. And then that had to be explained away like, nah, that couldn't be true. And then you hire the crime analysis, or Melissa, and she said, yep, it's true. There's a disparity. And so instead of our chief, the head of this particular department, coming to this council and to the community and saying, the first thing I want to do is address this disparity. it has caused tremendous pain in this community. As I mentioned earlier, we were over at the IMC where Representative Necritz, Elaine Necritz, has done a tremendous job showing the impact of fines and fees on poor people in particular, because that's who really suffers the most from it. A DUI that ends up being $1,500 that has nothing to do with the actual fine or the crime. Just all of these other fees that are associated with it, right? Just a regular traffic stop for speeding or running a red light or whatever, the ticket's $150, but if you go to court, now you got all this other stuff tacked on, right? That first line, that disparate impact on the black community shows up economically, right? And then you wonder why. We always say poverty and low income leads to more crime. Then why are you taking money from poor people if you're worried about crime? So why would you come back to this council first with a proposal for more police, not a proposal to address the disparity, to address the pain? This is why the black community feels disrespected, dismissed, and disregarded, because for over a decade, we've been telling you this is going on. You said, no, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Now, everybody that you can find has said, yeah, it is. There's a disparate impact on black people, economically and how we see the police department. And instead of the chief coming and saying, here's what my team, or I, as the chief of this department, has come up with to address this disparity, before we hear anything about that, we have a proposal to hire 2 more police officers so they can do what? Continue the disparity? That's how we receive that. So just out of respect, as you alluded to, Ms. Marlin, at our last council member, for your partners, out of respect for the citizens who have their concern and their grievance has been validated by the statistician that we hired, out of respect for them, then you come back with a proposal and say, look, this is what we're going to do to address that. I asked for a moratorium on investigatory stops. Everybody voted no. So now here we are going to sit and vote for more police officers, $200-some-thousand a year, and a mapping and the equipment for the mapping, and still not a proposal on how to address this disparity. Now, if you really want me to believe that you're concerned about how the black community feels about being policed, over-policed, or the disparate impact that it has on us, then you would force the chief to come up with a proposal to address that before you even entertain any of these other things. And there's no actual evidence that these 4 police officers are going to stop anything from happening. None. And none of you have presented that. It's just a feel-good thing right now for people to vote for to get a few more police officers. But there's no evidence that it's going to stop anything. Social workers, maybe, as you talked about, Mayor, that happened in wherever else you were, maybe that would be something that you could entertain. And then we talked about at the last meeting that even if we were to entertain something like that, there would be something for mental health. Now, I absolutely agree that there should be something for mental health. And I don't think that that's the thing that's stressing the officers, that they have to go to those particular calls, or that they have to deal with drug stuff, low-level drug stuff. And maybe if they wouldn't stopping black folks more than they should, then that would give them some time off. They wouldn't have to write up reports and stuff overtime for that. You know, there are ways to alleviate this stress. I don't want them to be stressed out. I don't want any of the departments to be stressed out. But don't tell me the only way you're going to address it is to hire more people, because then Bill going to need more people, Libby need more people, everybody need more people, right? And he said that the 2 officers is not going to affect the overtime. It's not going to affect that. So I know the votes are there for this, but I just wanted to make sure that it's clear and for all the public to see that we're going to talk about how important it is for us to deal with race relations, but we're going to put again on the back burner the desire, the pain, the frustration, and the economic disparity that it has on the black community, once again, and say we'll spend $200,000 on more police, but we don't. But yeah, Chief will get to us eventually about how to stop all this racial disparity and this racial profiling. We'll wait on that. That's what I'm hearing. Now, maybe I'm deaf in one ear and can't hear in the other, but that's what I'm hearing. So I will be voting no unless you come to me with a proposal first to address the issues that have been raised for over a decade, and then I will consider addressing the issues that you have raised about more police officers. Until then, my vote is no.
Diane?
I'll be supporting this. Our police department has been understaffed for years, and they have requested for years additional officers, and we're not included in the budget, and now we're playing catch up. This is not going to address the recent uptick in homicides. This addresses the fact that police duties have become more complex and more demanding over the years. And we need to bring our force up to at least what's considered to be typical standards compared to other communities. We could have all been saved a lot of anguish and time over the last couple of months if it had been determined back in November that we actually had only 2 openings available for officers to go into PTI training in this spring. And it wasn't actually until last week when I called the police chief and said, how many people can actually get into training for this spring? And the number was 2. So that's where we're going with now, and it's reasonable. We don't have to raise taxes and fees in the middle of the year. We can accommodate the expense for this fiscal year, and we will have to make some priorities in next year's budget. It's not going to be easy, but we can accommodate it. So I think this is a place to start, and we continue to address the issue of racial disparities. And I couldn't agree with you more about the fees. And a lot of those fees, as I understand, are imposed by the state. They tack fees onto various court costs, and that's one place to start attacking those fees that have nothing to do with the crime that's been committed. I don't think any criminal activity should be used as a revenue-generating source of funds, and that's something that we should be looking at the state level and the county level. There's probably county fees as well. I really don't know, but all those fees tacked on that makes that it adds to the economic impact on an individual should be addressed.
Aaron, then Eric.
So 2 things. One is we're sort of talking about, you said we'll just have to make those cuts. What exactly, those of you who are going to vote for this, what exactly are you proposing to cut out next year's budget for $200,000? I'd like to hear that before you vote on it. And there was also a proposal that Eric put forth and that I supported last time that we wouldn't support it unless there was money put aside for mental health and substance abuse, so that we could prevent the problem as opposed to putting the fire out once it starts again. And so there's a resolution now that we should do that will be presented in a little while. We ought to do that. It's no longer part of the actual the proposal or the ordinance. It's a resolution now that we should do that. So we know that it's campaign season, so I'd like to hear from the 2 mayoral candidates. Are you committed to spending that $200,000 on substance abuse and mental health if you are elected to be mayor?
Eric.
Actually, I'd like to hear that too, but maybe that comes in the discussion of the resolution.
That would be January 30th in this room.
But I would.
There's been a lot of politicking before January 30th in this room.
Can we get the Eric? Could you?
But I would like to point out that we haven't been completely unresponsive. We did on the matter of fees and fines. We did lower the fine for possession of marijuana to a nominal amount, and we did this partly because of recommendation from the Traffic Stop Task Force The Traffic Stop Task Force recommended that, although it isn't. It's partly it's partly overlap with traffic stops, but in general, we had looked at data that said that marijuana usage is equivalent between black people and white people, but we noted that the actual disposition of the cases was very disparate. And so we made a judgment that partly in order to reduce disparate impact, economic impact on poor people, and disparate racial impact, that the marijuana fine should be reduced. And I look forward to making other kinds of adjustments to things like that that are in our power. I think that's very important. But as you know, and I'm sure that, and it's why Representative Ammons and Representative Nekritz were so are active on this. A lot of this has to come from the state.
Mayor.
Well, I don't think we can count on the state for much. I think we're going to have to rely on ourselves. And in answer to your question, I've been working on this budget for many years now, and I think we've adjusted very well when new things have come up. I don't know if we're going to win in the Supreme Court, but I don't think they're going to have us pay back what has already been put into our Treasury. I gather that from the questions that were asked by the Supreme Court justices. So how we dealt with the recession and how we dealt with the loss of the Carl property tax was we made some very strategic cuts and we raised some small revenues and we balanced the budget that way. And one of the things that we did was we just lengthened the time to hire new employees when somebody retired or resigned. So I think that we can cope with this. I think our police are understaffed right now, and I think we need more police officers. I think we should be working with Champaign, and I've certainly, and the county on the mental health issue, and I've certainly been talking about this. I went to a meeting with New York in November and joined a national coalition to fund mental health for cities. So it's a huge issue, and we're just going to have to come to grips with it. We're not going to solve it all at once, but we're just going to work with our partners, the city of Champaign and the county, and possibly the University of Illinois, because we are not dealing with mental health properly now. And by default, the police of this country and the jails of this country have become the mental health centers. And I think we're pretty far ahead by not putting so many people in the jail because we have crisis intervention trained police officers. And that is thanks to the Police Training Institute at the University of Illinois.
So $500,000 shortfall, $190K, almost $200,000 each year. We are going to be forced to raise these same fees again, which are county, state, and city. They are not just at the state. Some of these are city and county fees, city fees in particular, since we're going to talk about us. So we are going to have to cut something, and everybody's still saying they're going to vote for this, but nobody's telling me what you're going to cut. So it's going to be people. More than likely, is what's going to end up being cut. So, and I just want to say again, make sure it's clear. Nobody's asking the chief to come up with a proposal either. So everybody's quiet about that. As Mr. Miller said, so you don't want to talk about this issue, right? It's reasonable. It's right, just, and needed in these times that we have a 21st century police department, a chief in particular who says, I'm going to deal with this particular issue head on and not act like it doesn't exist. So it's time for that proposal to be on the table. And all of you are just letting them off the hook with this vote to move forward. I just want you to know that that's how it's going to be seen. So,
Mike.
Well, that may be how you see it, but I think a lot of us...
I'm not the only one.
My turn. That may be how you see it and how folks who agree with you on this issue see it. I see it... All right, see you, buddy. So anyway, But that's not how I see it. First of all, the mayor asked the chief of police, what do you need? The chief of police came forward with his proposal for additional personnel. So let's just make clear about how that transpired. The chief of police has for several years been asking for more personnel. This is not a reaction to an uptick in murders as much as it is, from the chief's perspective, the renewal of his request over the last several years for additional personnel. From a management perspective, from somebody who manages budgets, from somebody who spent 20 years around the state government budget process and in it, $200,000 is de minimis. Is de minimis in terms of, look it up, it's Latin. But anyway,
I'm just
it's
surprised to hear that from you with your conservative views about money all the time.
Okay, still my turn. So it's a small amount, all right? It's a small amount that can be managed. It's managed not necessarily by laying off people. That is an absolute last resort. But how it is managed is through what's called hiring lag. The mayor alluded to it. Our budget officer alluded to it. It's you just manage the process by lagging positions when they come open for a small period of time. Over a multi-million-dollar budget like the city has, that amount of hiring lag is very easy to manage. And it's prudent and appropriate that this council pass this now without considering additional tax and fee increases, and then address the annualization of this expense after the court decision on Carl. And this is wholly appropriate. And to your lastly, to your comments that somehow the chief is ignoring racial profiling, is ignoring this issue, is absurd on its face. He spends, and his staff spends, an incredible amount of time working on this issue. It's a complicated issue. It's an issue without an overnight solution. It's an issue that this council has spent countless hours dealing with. And I just really think it's wholly inappropriate. And I know this is a very important issue for you, but I think it's wholly inappropriate that you demonize the chief, that you minimize or disregard in whole the efforts of all the people in this room and beyond to try to work this issue out. It's just stunning to me how you come here every week and browbeat people when you ought to be working positively with people, because there's not a person up here who is denying any of this. There's not a person up here who doesn't want to improve things. So I would just humbly ask you to rethink the way you're going about this, because you have advocates. And the chief of police is working very hard on this. And it's just very disheartening to sit here and to listen to the diatribes, to listen to the minimizing and diminishing and absolute taking out of complete context the efforts of the people on this issue. It's stunning to me. Oh, and yeah, and I'll be an aye vote.
Well, since I was used in discussion, I get to respond then, right?
Well, actually, technically, no.
Oh, no, he spoke to me directly. There's no question about that. So I'm going to respond to this diatribe and some of this stuff that spews from your lips about black-on-black crime and social programs creating dependency when white folks depend on more on welfare than anybody does. So, you know, some of the stuff that you say, it's mind-boggling to me as well. So, since you want to defend the chief so much, if you're working on it 24/7, then where's the proposal? Don't you think you ought to come up with something by now, if you've been working on it for so long? But what's evident through your rant and some of the other things that I see taking place here, you just become the face of it, but I guess the rest of them feel similar, just don't express it. But the reality is that the issue that I put forward, that we have been working on for and asking for relief for over a decade, 12 some odd years, right, still has no actual proposal to address it. And everybody's like, yeah, we'll get to it, right? We'll get to it. So you say you're working on it, but I haven't heard a proposal that says, look, we're going to do this particular thing that the data shows will address this particular problem directly, right? What you say is, well, it's this black-on-black crime problem that you have, and so the chief and the Urbana Police Department has to go on, and they have to arrest black people or stop black people more to address that particular problem. You know, that to me is very indicative of the same old rhetoric that we've heard for years from folks who just want to simply ignore the problem of race and what role it plays in these traffic stops. So, you know, you have the votes for it. You're going to bring in more police officers, and we'll see exactly what they do. And so I don't have much else to say.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of sending this to council?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The motion carries.
I thought I was louder than everybody else that way.
Okay, the next item is resolution number 2017-13R, resolution regarding the interface between mental health and criminal justice and public safety. Alderman Jacobson.
Thank you. So I'll tell some more about my evolution. So I originally, as I think people know, composed this as a sort of balance weight to the proposal to add police officers. And now I've been playing catch up to understand the context in which we're working in terms of what's going on in the county and how we would fit in. And one of the most, maybe the most important thing I discovered is that the county has received and is in the process of implementing a 2-year grant from the Justice Department for $150,000 that's called the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program Grant, administered by Chief Deputy Alan Jones and by Sheila Ferguson, whom we've heard about in other contexts. There's this is overseen by a crisis response planning committee, which includes representation from the Champaign County Board, State's Attorney's Office, Mental Health Board, healthcare consumers, and the person whom I spoke with most at the greatest depth about this was Claudia Lenhoff, Director of Champaign County Healthcare Consumers. The University of Illinois Police Department, Prairie Center. So neither the city of Champaign nor the city of Urbana appear to be involved in this. But that kind of, that doesn't matter. But what does matter is that the goals that they are working towards, have been working towards, are just almost completely aligned with what the whereases in our resolution. So they've been working on, for selected individuals, they've been working on a program of assessment for people who come in contact with criminal justice system and so forth. So, so in this context, I think what's got to happen, so this is by nature of a planning grant, and there are going to be some sorts of results coming out that are that will need to be scaled up, and that obviously resources from local resources would have to be engaged for this. So what I guess what I'd like to do is, and I've got a fair number of suggested wording changes from Dennis, all of which I think are good clarifications of what I was getting at. Dennis has a more direct way of writing things, and then I'd like to modify the very last. I'd like to modify the last part to reflect, engaging with these other entities in scaling up the grant. So I guess I would like to do a little tinkering with this and bring it back to you in a newer and more. What I'm trying to remember is the epitaph that Benjamin Franklin wrote on his tombstone. He said, "Here lies Benjamin Franklin, who will, at some future time, return in a new and improved state." And so I would like to maybe do that rather than do a lot of the wordsmithing. But I think it'll be important now for us to engage with this group really on an ongoing basis, and I'm glad to continue to do that, follow up on my conversations with them, but
I think we have questions here, and you're alluding to a main one here. I don't know if the mayor knows what I know there have been some meetings going on. I don't know if the mayor can fill us in and answer one of your questions, is what is the level of coordination today?
I talked with Sheila Ferguson maybe a month ago, and she is working with one of our police lieutenants, our crisis intervention officer. And so I asked her my question was, how much money do you want from Urbana? Because I thought the cities and the county would have to chip in money, and she said that what she wanted was a crisis intervention officer to work with them. So they're working on this, and I'm sure that if they need our help, they're going to come to us. I mean, they're going to inform us about it anyway, but I think they are working very hard on it, and we ought to end up with something better than we have now. So that's the extent of it for me.
Okay, so Eric, let me ask this. So in terms of your timing for this, are you proposing to keep this in committee and see it again in 3 weeks?
Yeah, I'd like to keep it in committee and improve it. So
and maybe by that time we can get a fuller picture too then.
Yes.
Okay, Dennis?
Yeah, and I appreciate Eric's willingness to accept what I think are friendly, editing amendments. I understood what you were aiming for, and just wanted to kind of make it maybe a little more tight. And I think we also kind of agreed by having a conversation just before this meeting that one of the things that I wanted to change in particular was the specific dollar amount that was going to be set aside for this, because we don't really know. We want, but it's still a commitment to be ready to support financially whatever is necessary. We just don't know what that's going to be, and the mayor just reiterated that again. So it's modified it, and I think it takes out for me like the stumbling block, which was a specific amount which was suggested, and it might end up being that much, but until we know why even name a name.
Yeah, and I will. The final part of this will be, although absent a dollar amount, a firm commitment to do our share to implement this, to implement these goals on a recurring basis.
And that's what I agree with, and I like the intent, so I'm basically in support of your resolution.
So anyway, I'll move to keep this in committee, and I'll improve it according to all the input I get and bring it back if that's the will of council.
And I'll second that motion then.
Okay, it's been moved by Eric, seconded by Dennis to keep this in committee. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll see it in 3 weeks then. or so, if it's ready. Next item is ordinance number 2017-1004, an ordinance disconnecting certain territory from the City of Urbana, 2209 East Perkins Road. This is related to Thomas E. Bergen II. So we'll get a report from Community Development first, and then Mr. Bergen wishes to speak.
All right, good evening. All right, so this is a request from Thomas Bergen to disconnect or de-annex a parcel at 2209 East Perkins Road from the City of Urbana. And this is located, if you look at Exhibit A in your memo, it's out on Perkins Road, just west of Cook's Lane. And let's see, Mr. Bergen does not intend to develop this lot. Oh, thank you, Jason. He does not intend to develop the lot. He owns the two adjacent lots. There's a skinny lot just to the west and that he owns, and then also this one at 2207. And he just intends to use 2209 as additional open space for his lots to the west. The Illinois Municipal Code authorizes a landowner to file for a petition to disconnect from a municipality, but the decision by the municipality to grant or deny a petition is discretionary. This property was annexed into the city back in 2010. There's also an annexation agreement that was done prior to that, which rezoned the property and would allow the erection of a single-family home and a large machine shed on the site. And the annexation agreement was necessary to allow those intended uses. The previous petition and annexation agreement are in your memo for reference. The prior owner, Scott Plunk, who intended to build that home and the machine shed, that's hard to say, on the site, passed away before he was able to build either of those, and then his estate sold it to Mr. Bergen in 2015. As I said, Mr. Bergen does not intend to build a new house or machine shed on the property, and therefore does not intend to use it as was planned when the annexation agreement was put into effect. Though when he bought the property, he did know that it was within the city and was subject to that annexation agreement. If you look at Exhibit C, you can see that the property is within the city's, that's not too great. Whoops. There we go. The property is right down here, and this is the future land use from the comprehensive plan. So it's in the city's future planning area, and disconnecting the property could slow or stymie future growth in the area. And the reason that's important, if you go back to Exhibit B and flip that around. This property, which is the one that's right here in the hashed area, so this is within the city. All these dotted areas are outside of the city. This property acts as sort of a bridge to future annexations on the north side of Perkins Road, particularly this large lot that's currently being farmed, but could be developed in the future. Let's see. Okay, but as I stated, Mr. Bergen does not intend to use the property as was stated in the annexation agreement, and he rightly points out that any future development, if this parcel is disconnected now, any future home or building that requires a sewer connection in the future would be required to annex into the city at that time. In the case of annexations or disconnections, we look at the fiscal impacts. This would have a pretty minimal negative impact on the city's finances. The most recent tax bill had $222 going to the city, about $200 going to the Urbana Park District, and $35 to Cunningham Township. So in this case, the committee of the whole should consider this petition and then make a recommendation to the city council with either a recommendation to approve the petition or to deny the petition. The staff recommendation is that the committee make a recommendation to the council to deny the petition, as it does, or as it could slow and thwart any future development and future annexations. That concludes my report. I know Mr. Bergen is present, and he would like to address the committee after I answer any questions.
Questions? Okay. Bill, then Dennis.
You said if somebody builds a house that requires a sewer connection, it would automatically be annexed. If you build a house, do you require a sewer connection? Can you still do something else besides sewer?
So if you are within 200 feet of an existing sanitary sewer, you have to connect to that sanitary sewer. And there is, it doesn't show it on the map, but there is sanitary sewer running all along the north side of Perkins Road. And if, since this property is adjacent to the city, once it had that sewer connection, we have an agreement with the sanitary district that an annexation agreement is required, and then since it's adjacent to the city, it would be required to annex immediately.
So, even though the memo said that he lived to the west of 2209, it wasn't clear to me, so I'd like to ask, and we also have two, on Perkins Road on the south side, there are two lots that are labeled 2205. Is that a mistake?
Which exhibit are you looking at?
I'm looking at Exhibit A location map.
Okay, let's take a look.
So you have two lots called 2205 in a row on the south side of Perkins Road, close to 2209.
Yeah, so it's the properties he owns are 2207. And
Is that where he lives? Is that building his house?
He owns that. I'm not actually sure if he's living there yet.
That's the intent, is that correct?
Yeah, he intends to live there, yes.
But, okay.
And then he owns this little sliver next door, which I believe was originally a part of 2209.
Is that platted separately, the sliver?
Yes.
It has a separate number?
I believe it has a separate PIN, but not a separate address number.
So it's not 2207 and a half or something?
I don't believe so.
Are these addresses? Is that what we're looking at? These are mailing addresses?
That's correct, and I'm not sure. So this is all pulled from the county GIS data. So I'm not totally sure why there are two 2205s.
Okay. Well, all right. So he intends to live in one of them, and then he's going to have a neighbor in between his property, or does he own 2207?
No, he owns 2207.
So this is like a 3-lot ownership right now.
Correct.
He's just enhanced his property.
Correct.
All right. And currently, so then when he moves into 2205, is he required to hook up to the sanitary sewer line, or is he out of he's in the county, so he doesn't have to, right?
Correct, unless a new sewer connection. I suppose if his septic system failed at some point in the future, I believe he would be required.
He's on a septic system, so it's not an issue right now.
Yeah.
All right. I guess for me, what I'm not clear is, okay, so yeah, why would he be both in the city and out of the city on his property if he considered his holdings to be a unit of his property and his ownership? It would be kind of strange to be both in and out of the city. All right, that's interesting. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike, then Diane. And Mr. Bergen's going to be up here, and you'll be able to ask him questions in a moment. He's going to speak. So
Yeah, my question's for staff.
Oh, okay.
So you made a statement earlier that the staff recommendation is to deny, and one of the reasons was that this could, I think you used the word stymie growth.
Correct.
So how would this stymie growth?
Well, so if we disconnect, or if the property is disconnected from the city, then until such time as if it were developed in the future, and we don't know how long that could be. It could be decades. It could never be.
Probably will be.
It could never be developed. So it would remain in the county for decades. And like I said, as it stands, it extends the city's boundary to the north side of Perkins Road, and we do foresee, I think, some development taking place up on this parcel up here that's currently farmed. So if 2209 is disconnected, then you don't have that connection to the other side of Perkins, and then this would be out in the county, and it would just slow the growth of the city.
But the reality is, if anybody wants to connect to a sanitary, they will be annexed.
Only if they're adjacent to the city. So if we took this parcel out and that property were developed, they would enter into an annexation agreement, which would say once they become adjacent to the city, then they have to annex, but that wouldn't be annexed.
Okay, so there's no other property to the north of Perkins Road that's in the city?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Diane? Oh, okay. Any further questions for Kevin? Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Bergen, you're up. And there was a handout from Mr. Bergen to everybody.
Hello. Thanks for hearing me. Pretty simple. Kevin pretty much summarized it all, most of it. As he said, when I bought this, I had no intentions of planning. Scott Plunk passed away, poor soul. The reason it was petitioned into the city originally was because he was going to build a house. Well, I'm eventually hoping to move into the house at 2207 and just extend that as basically a yard. And like it was mentioned, it's kind of silly to have county, city, county, and there's nothing out there on Perkins Road up to High Cross Road, down to Airport and back on Brownfield. Nothing out there is city other than that one lot. Future land use that he'd mentioned also, this still fits into that. If it ever does get developed, you know, it would have to be annexed in again. I mean, that's not a problem. If I ever built the house, it would have to be, like you said, with my sanitary, 2207, if I have to replace my septic, that house would have to be annexed in because it's touching the city across the Saline branch there. Having a vacant lot, it seems a little impractical to pay for city services that will never be used. You know, I'm paying, you know, city police, city fire, library, you know, park district, which living 2 doors down in that house, can I still use those services since I'm not living on that property? You know, that's just a question. It is in the process of the state, you know, had the taxes appealed, and it's in the state now pending their reduction or whatever. So it is the minimum amount of value. You know, that right now it's assessed about $49,000. And, you know, I didn't pay that for that. It was for sale for a while, and I ended up buying it. I've got a book. I'm going to buy a bunch of trees if this happens. My goal is to make it green again, more green than it is. But I can't really do anything until I know which way I have to go, what rules I have to go by on that one piece of property. In my little packet you guys got here, Kevin had a lot of the same kind of things. It's just showing how isolated that one lot is versus everything around it. I bought a property, corner of Airport Road and Brownfield Road, about 10 years ago. It's got several houses, duplex on it. Came to the city to see what I could and couldn't do before I bought it. They were thrilled that I bought it. Said in 5 years you'll build a gas station there. This is all developing. Okay, I've been in Urbana 53 years, and this area, other than the subdivision out on Airport Road that they've built, is as it was 53 years ago. You know, I lived in a foster home just up the hill there when I was in high school for a short time, same thing as it was then. And so that farmland that Kevin had mentioned, I can't imagine that in my lifetime being developed. You know, it's just, you have to drive past Willow Springs, Carroll Addition, you know, all these county properties to get here. Or if you come the other way, you have to go by Scottswood, Ed Scott, you know, all these other subdivisions that aren't in the city to get to this one lot. So it's not real practical to figure out, especially when we can't take care of what's within our city's boundaries now. But that's pretty much what I got. I'm hoping to get some support, and I know it's kind of, after everything else this evening, it's kind of petty seeming, but it is hopefully my future home site.
You have 1 minute.
So I'm good. I'm done. Any questions?
Questions? Mike?
I would move that we send this to the council with a recommendation of approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, and that's to disconnect.
To disconnect.
Okay. Dennis, you have a question?
Yeah, not for the property owner, but I'd like to just put a couple things out in discussion.
Okay, I do have a question for you then. Okay. So you're planning to move into 2207, is that correct?
Yeah, and that small part is technically 2207 and a half.
Okay.
I think at some place it says that.
Okay.
And they are 3 separate PIN numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, my goal is to move into 2207.
Okay, and is there any way we can persuade you to annex your new house into the into the city? Maybe that's the question we should be asking.
Go the opposite way.
Yeah. Is there, you know, I mean, that's...
I would be willing to sign an annexation agreement to that lot. I mean, I don't see that developing in my lifetime. I mean, I'm going to have it as long as I live, if I move out there. You know, what happens after that? You know, I still don't foresee development out there because it's exactly how it was when I was in high school.
And the other question was, you know, there's some thought that there's potential for the 2 farm fields to the north on the other side of Perkins Road. Have you heard anything? Have you?
I believe that might be De Havens that might own that. I'm not positive, but I don't foresee them selling it or developing that. The vacant lot directly to the north of this lot, it's actually an easement for the sanitary. I don't believe the sewer goes west on Perkins past there, like in front of 2207. I got a map from UNC Sanitary when I first purchased this, and they show the sanitary going behind those houses on the north of Perkins, going up to Brownfield Road.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
Oh, do we have any more questions from Mr. Bergen? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Dennis.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting case because, you know, for the city's future interest, that particular lot is the only one that actually has access to the farm field because of the, I guess that the unnumbered lot on the north side, directly across the street. I suppose that's an access road into the farmland, or maybe it's not. I don't know how that is accessed, you know, for a tractor to actually cultivate. But that kind of connectivity doesn't exist along the street at any other location. Right. And so if we remove it, even if his house on 2207 became annexed because his sewer line was failed, his septic tank failed, it still wouldn't jump past the row of homes on the north side to get to that potential developments thing. So if we choose to delete it from the city, maybe not a very likely, but a potential connection to the large development on the north side, which is now a cultivated field, is lost. On the other hand, we could wait for somebody to decide to build a house there or for his septic tank to fail, but it wouldn't change much. It would probably be more likely that all the properties on the north side will have a septic tank that'll fail before then. And that would be then, if that was annexed into the city, then there would be a direct backyard connection to the large area that the city staff is kind of interested in evolving into a potential development. So there's kind of a yin and yang of potential here. It does make no sense for a man to have city services on his orchard but not his house, and to have a city snowplow come out and plow the property in front of his orchard but not in front of his house. It seems like a disconnect. So I don't know. Maybe at this time. The other thing that we have here that could play into backwards for us is that would this be a precedent, and have we disconnected other properties in the last 15 years? I'd like to know that, because we've got a lot of people who've been annexed into the city against their will, and if we're willing to disconnect one property, what's the likelihood of being requested now by 7 other people to disconnect as well? So, okay, I'd like to know.
So it's a relatively novel case, but there has been one other disconnection that took place, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the year of it. It was in the 2000s. And in the research that I did, it seemed that the property was annexed into the city, and then quickly it was disconnected because there was some sort of protest, or I believe it was the Edgescott Fire Protection District had some issue with it being annexed into the city. So it was disconnected, but it happened pretty within like 6 or 8 months after it was annexed. Was it a lawsuit? Okay. So it was a lawsuit.
Oh, that's a big motivation, a lawsuit. All right, so this is like an anomaly, but will it become a precedent for other people to choose to disengage from the city? I guess not if they've already accepted sewer service.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the state statute allows people to petition for disconnection. I think they'd have to have a compelling case. They couldn't. I do think this is this is an interesting case. I don't think most other annexations that have taken place would have these types of circumstances necessarily. So people would be welcome to apply for their own disconnections, but if their reasoning were, I just don't want to be in the city, I don't know that could be very
right, I can imagine. I know a couple property owners who just came in recently, who really didn't want to be here, but we said, come on in. Okay, thank you.
Mayor, then Diane.
Although I can't see why anybody wouldn't want to have this city council and mayor, but, my question is about if a septic tank fails, does the property have to be adjacent to the city in order to trigger the sewer connection requirement and the annexation requirement? If the septic tanks north of Perkins Road failed, they wouldn't have to do anything, would they, except fix their septic tank?
No, they would be required to connect to the sanitary sewer, and they would be required to have an annexation agreement drafted.
Oh.
But they would only have to annex into the city if they became adjacent to the city at some point in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Diane?
Well, I remember when this case came before the council, and it was a unusual case then, and it resulted in this one property kind of sticking up like a sore thumb, which it was just an odd case to begin with, and I think in this situation, this sort of request should be considered on a case-by-case basis. And in this case, I think it's reasonable to approve the de-annexation, or because it just makes sense. I mean, there's nothing around there, and really, development is not going to happen up there for decades, probably. And we can't really make a compelling case that this is going to block development, because it's years, and when that happens, then we can deal with it. But it just makes sense to put it back the way it was, just to me.
Eric, then Bill.
So I want to say, first of all, Mr. Bergen, that your case is not petty. This is your life, your property. You've been here for a long time, and I know you have an emotional as well as a fiscal attachment to that property. Nevertheless, I'm going to vote against you in this particular case. And I don't think we have any idea when or if development might occur to the north. But I think that I don't feel. I feel as though I would be letting future councils, future citizens down if I voted in such a way as to preclude that. So I think I'm going to have to. I'm going to vote to deny.
Bill?
There is some logic to having an empty lot next to you that's in the city, and it's a relatively inexpensive way to get low-cost access to our park programs and be able to check out books from the library. And there are some advantages, so I hope you've taken that into consideration. It's probably less than a lot of people would pay. And, you know, a lot of us that live in town and have to pay for the taxes and our house on it, that have like a, you know, might have a $150,000 house with property, and you can get the same privileges for less on a smaller lot. But I do have similar concerns to Eric as far as not having quite as much flexibility in the future. And I know that people that when you purchased this property, you were aware of the annexation, or you were aware of, you know, the fact that it was in the city. Didn't prevent you from purchasing the property, and if it wasn't in the city, you might have had to pay more for this property because the taxes would have been lower. So you might have gotten a little bit of benefit on the price from that. So I'm probably going to vote no too.
Dennis.
If we disconnect this, but the house that Mr. Bergen moves to next to it, the next lot to the west, eventually has a failure, and he's obligated, I guess he's going to be obligated to connect with the sewer line because it's tangibly close, it's just across the street, right? So he's got access to it. If then at that time he was obligated to consolidate all of his property into the city and not just to 207 where his house was sitting, we would then perhaps in the next 15 years regain that access to the field to the north. Is it likely that we could arrange for that kind of an agreement with the property owner, I wonder? I guess that's one I'd have to ask him.
I'm going to interject. I had exactly the same thought, and Mr. Bergen actually sort of triggered
Suggested
that
it.
thinking, suggested that, and that is that can we develop an agreement that would disconnect him for now, but at such time that the city is in need of a bridge to a new development, and this particular property would achieve that, that we could require annexation. And it would be something in perpetuity or something like that that would be a lien, or some, and this may be a question for city attorney.
I'd have to research state law on the issue, but contract law allows the parties to reasonably agree to what they agree to. But again, I have not done the research, nor have been asked to do the research until now on state law.
Well, I had a different thought, but it might be difficult if the existing annexation agreement was amended. However, one of the parties is deceased, so there may not be a way to do that. Also, annexation agreements we've learned are limited to 20 years and cannot, even if both parties apparently want to make it in perpetuity, that may not be honored.
Okay, well then, Mr. Bergen was nodding his head in, I think, agreement with the idea, the concept. Let me suggest then that we have a 20-year. We look at disconnecting, but requiring a reconnection in 20 years before it runs out. I mean, is that a reasonable thing to do? That in 20 years we're going to re-annex that period.
I don't really know what the form of that would be if it's not an annexation agreement. Maybe that's a legal research question. And what is the hook to two-party agreement?
Well, I think, again, without doing the statutory research, I think the parties could agree. It would take good faith on both parties. They could agree to allow the disconnection and then re-execute a new annexation agreement. The question becomes, what is the logical triggering point for the agreement? The question becomes, what indicia is built into the agreement, rational, objective indicia, that would suggest the need, the triggering for the annexation itself. It can't just be, well, if the city needs it, because at any time the city can declare, we need it. So the parties would have to agree, and I'd have to leave that to Libby and the owner to agree on the types of conditions or indicia, just like any other annexation agreement and all. And I don't know whether we can come up with anything that, other than the business with sanitary and all that.
Well, I think the condition would be development across the street to the north.
Well, I'm not sure even that would work, because the farm property could be platted in such a way that that little opening that you see between 2212 and 2302 is not developed, in which case there's no contiguity which is required for annexation. Whether it's triggered because of a need of sanitary, there has to be contiguity. You can't annex islands of property. And it would be a very simple process of platting that farm field to make sure that there is no connection between the city through that little corridor that somebody suggested might be an access road into the farm property.
I think that statute has laid out pretty clear direction on how to do agreements and annexation agreements. And if we start doing these one-off other types of agreements, I just don't know how lawful that is, what kind of precedent that begins, that, we're not going to abide by annexation agreements with all the mutual protections that those provide and the infrastructure those provide. Instead, we're going to spend perhaps considerable staff or legal time trying to construct a one-off agreement when we do have planning policies and statutory direction for annexation agreements and sewer connections. So I would be concerned about that as a precedent, that we're skirting somehow our normal procedures, and we have like very lengthy annexation procedures. And there are ways to amend annexation agreements. We've done those from time to time. But I think trying to avoid the use of the annexation agreement for properties that are near the city or within our ETJ that are required to have agreements, whether it's because of zoning or sewer hookups or subdivision, I think that we're creating kind of an alternate process, and that would be concerning, and we would need to spend a lot of time to create that process so that it could be sustained and supported, and I just don't know that is really worth the effort for, this particular decision, which is a petition to disconnect.
Okay, well, thank you, Libby. Bill.
I have one other question, maybe, so I know, like, for snow plowing, Dennis brought it up, we trade off with the county or townships. We'll do some of their roads, they'll do some of ours, and we work it out. So somebody will plow that. Do we have the same kind of agreement with maintenance? Since that's been in the city, do we pay anything for maintenance on Perkins Road for that little section? Would we save any money by
I don't think so. I mean, we meet with the township regularly, and I think John Collins is here too, but when we only have like a little bit, the township will do it and vice versa. And we do have a lot more manpower than the township. And so we meet regularly, Bill Gray does, and it really does work out very well. And it's really just good working relationships between the two agencies.
Okay, we have a motion to send this to council with the I said we have a motion to send this to council with a recommendation for approval. Further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Dennis?
One more question. Obviously, since the house on 207 is not occupied, Mr. Berlin lives elsewhere, and I'm wondering if he lives in the city of Urbana and receives benefits and is able to go to the library. The answer is yes.
He does. He said he lives here. He's lived here.
Going to gain that benefit
he's lived here for 53 years. So he might be giving it up if he doesn't keep his property in town. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'll say aye, I think.
Motion carries. I vote for aye. Those opposed?
No.
Oh, sorry. No. Okay, 4 ayes, 2 noes. Sorry. It's getting late and I've been up way too long. Okay, so we'll vote it up or down at City Council in 2 weeks. Thank you. Next up is another member of the public waiting for us to get there. And that's ordinance number 2017-1005, an ordinance approving a redevelopment agreement with D&E Enterprises LLC, 136 Main Street. This is the Cohen Building. Brendan.
That's right. It's 136 West Main Street, the Cohen Building. The owner and developer, Dan Maloney of D&E Enterprises LLC, is in the back. This is a proposed $2.5 million redevelopment project to fully reactivate the property with dynamic retail, office, and/or apartment uses. The proposed agreement in the packet would offer a 20% reimbursement on redevelopment expenses in the form of a loan to assist with project costs forgivable upon 2 years of continuous operation. The developer is targeting ground floor restaurant use, basement bar and kitchen, and a second floor office or apartment use. The project meets the goals of the Central TIF and the 2012 Downtown Plan. It's consistent with council goals, the property zoning, and the 2011 Downtown Market Study. Staff would also work with the developer to set goals for minority and female-owned contractor participation during the project and would monitor the outcomes in partnership with Human Resources and Human Relations staff. The agreement would require a budget amendment that would be forthcoming. The incentive is expected to create a break-even return to local taxing bodies within 7 years and a net return of over $500,000 within 10. When discounted at 5% for inflation and risk, that return on investment is estimated at 53% over 10 years. And again, the developer is present if you have questions, and staff is recommending approval.
Questions? Dennis.
Yeah, I'd like. Couldn't the developer come up and converse a little bit?
Dan.
Okay, this is Mr. Dan Maloney. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yeah. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
Quite interested in this building for a lot of different reasons. It's a beautiful building. It has an interesting history. I was out of town, so I wasn't able to take advantage of the tour of the inside, but Charlie apparently was there, and he said it's beautiful inside, and I can only assume it is. Now, in the window of the building, I saw a couple of historic pictures of the original builder, and I understand that you have proof through blueprints that it's indeed a Royer building, designed by his staff or himself.
Yes, one of the sets of blueprints that we had out during the tour showed Royer stamp on the...
Yeah, and of course I'm interested in that because I've helped to create, I did create the Joseph W. Royer Arts and Architectural District, and I'd love to talk to you about putting a suitable historic marker on the building. Assuming that the facade is basically not altered, and I saw photographs in the displays of what the interior might be changed to. I don't know if those were your conceptions or just generic conceptions of how the space might be used. So can you tell me a little bit about your intent to renovate, and how faithful will you try to keep the interior as well as the exterior to have a sense of the historical period that it was created in?
The intent is to keep the exterior...
Mr. Miller, could you pull the microphone
Sure.
closer to you? Sorry.
Yeah, the intent is to keep the exterior pretty much as is, except for possibly some changes in the windows. And we've got, if you looked at some of the photos that we had in the building, some of the entryways, especially there's 3 bays to the building.
Mm-hmm.
The entryway of the front of the center bay and the eastmost bay, those have changed over the last 20 or 30 years anyway. So we're looking at possibly some changes on those, but pretty minor. So I'd say very minor differences on the exterior, so keep that as true as possible.
So you're not going to super modernize the first floor on the exterior?
And to answer your other question, and try to answer kind of both, is the renderings were just conceptual. So
okay.
Again, I think maybe possibly some changes to the windows. That's at least what the conceptual drawing shows, that the kind of the whole windows would open up. But as far as all the brickwork and the terracotta, that don't see any no desire to change any of that. As far as the interior, looking through all the photos we have or the drawings we have, what seems to be the most obvious that has not changed since it was first built was primarily in the first bay, which used to be the Urbana Banking Company. I mean, there was one main change in that, and they put a staircase and an elevator in that. But if you could see pretty easily, if you envision if that staircase and elevator were removed, which is one of the things we're looking at doing, that you could have a very original look to that, what used to be the Urbana Banking Company.
Mm-hmm.
Again, don't have a lot of information about the other bays or what it looked like upstairs, so it's kind of hard to keep that sort of true to what it originally was.
Okay. Of course, it's very exciting for the downtown to have that building revitalized and become commercial or retail access, and it sounds like you're interested in a food service, bar, some kind of service like that on 2 floors, and offices perhaps, or residential on the second. I read the proposal. Those are the kinds of things that we'd really love to see there. So the kind of assistance that you're seeking from the city is, it was termed as a loan, but it would be forgiven based on the renovation work and the expenses. So Brandon, this would be like we've done with other buildings and renovations in the past, that the loan gets forgiven as materials are spent and paid for by the developer, so they're reimbursed. Is that the same kind of loan are we talking about here? Or is this a different kind of proposal?
It's very similar to recent agreements, such as with the Stevens Building and 401 North Broadway. No payment is made until the developer completes a full phase, including an appropriate certification, either a certificate of occupancy or a letter of completion by our building safety staff, at which time the developer can submit expenses, and they're reimbursed at the rate for each of the phases described.
Mm-hmm.
That payment to the developer then becomes a loan. It's recorded on a promissory note, and it's backed by a mortgage on the property. After 2 years of continuous operation of that given of the space, then those loans are forgiven.
Mm-hmm. So successful operation for 2 years. I had something else, but I lost it, so I'm going to let somebody else ask a question.
Diane.
Well, I had the opportunity to tour the building during the Imbibe Urbana open house, and it's gorgeous. It's stunningly beautiful and in surprisingly good condition, top to bottom. Even the basement is amazingly dry. So this site has great potential, and really the interior isn't going to. The bones are there. You just take out the ceiling and some of the paneling, and you're halfway there. So anyway, I'm happy to support this proposal. Where are we? Do we have a motion?
No, not yet. I've
Oh.
got one question myself,
Okay.
but yeah. So, Mr. Maloney, the one thing I see is tricky here is a basement kitchen. I hear those are difficult to build and operate in. So, where are you at on that?
I guess I kind of view that's the concept is making full use of the basement and the first floor, to the extent possible, and as much as can be integrated into restaurant, or we also have a kind of restaurant speakeasy. I think it ultimately depends also on who we can bring as a restaurateur that's going to want to build into that space. So that's the idea of a kitchen in the basement gives maximum use of the first floor, but I do believe there's some other alternatives. And again, it's ultimately going to depend on who we bring in and how they want to lay it out.
Okay.
So.
Is there, Bill?
Yeah, that was similar. I had a similar concern about the kitchen in the basement, and I have worked in restaurants before where you've had a big walk-in cooler in the basement and next to storage, and you can actually put your kegs in there, and it goes straight up to the tap, so that works pretty good. So as far as the order of things go, will you be trying to find a restaurateur before you do the final designs of this, or your plan is to go ahead and do these similar to what you've proposed in the drawings, and then try to find somebody to run it?
Find a restaurateur first before we build out the restaurant, because your concerns are, I think we need to find someone, how would they want it laid out? So one of the reasons when Brandon and I were talking about this, we broke it out into phases. There are some things that we can do ahead of time that make it more appealing to a restaurateur, and then we can also build out the second floor without kind of securing some of the restaurateur. So again, we've got it in phases for that specific reason.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I also took the tour. I agree. I think it's a beautiful building and really nice history. I hope you can work the history into the theme of the restaurant a little bit. I guess for staff, I had a question about what you consider performing optimally. I don't remember what the sales tax percentages of all those of the three entities you're considering: the city, school, and county. So I guess I could figure out about what kind of revenue that means, but I don't really want to do that. Can you tell me, is that similar to like Black Dog? If it does, it has to do about as well as Black Dog or something like that in order to generate the kind of revenue you've estimated for the payback period?
Mm-hmm. I don't recall the revenue number underlying the sales tax projections here, but I believe it would be more comparable to, say, Crane Alley, where you really have a large full-service restaurant and bar in continuous operation, which, it's just we're anticipating a larger scale restaurant than what we'd see at Black Dog.
Okay, that helps.
I got a question.
Okay,
Dennis. I'm not going to make the motion. I can let Diane make a motion. Okay, so again,
we need a motion to extend the meeting. We have 4 more items. They look very quick, but John Collins has been waiting patiently. So,
Okay.
Motion to extend for 15 more minutes.
Reluctantly, I'll move.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're extended for 15 more minutes.
Right.
Sorry.
All right, so I have a real concern about maybe the conceptual reconfiguration of your windows on the facade, because if you change them to become modernized, you basically alter the facade in a very significant way, which Alice Novak will talk to you about. And so my hope is that you would honor the building enough to work with the basic window format you have because you already have potential clear story windows over the, I mean, you have a structure that can, with very careful modification, serve your needs. But if you rip out the first floor windows across the facade and put in some modernization there, you're really going to be changing the building's appearance rather dramatically, and it's going to become disjointed design-wise. So that's a very sensitive area, and I'd like you to. I'm going to support this because I think it's 97% sure a great event, but I'm worried about the beauty of the building being compromised.
Okay,
too much.
I'm looking for a motion here.
Okay.
I move that we send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Diane, seconded by Dennis. Mike, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I just wanted to say I go by this building all the time. I think it's one of the most beautiful buildings in Urbana. Wasn't here when you did the open house. I'm sure the inside is awesome, and you will make it even better. No drive-through. There would be any drive-through. I got to have a drive-through. He needs something a little more upscale anyway. So, I wish you well. I'm supportive. Nothing against law firms, but it's kind of nice to have the ability to repurpose this space to where it's not going to be a law firm, and we're going to actually be bringing folks into town. And I think you've made history here in your proposal. In one of the pictures, I think this is probably the first economic development proposal in the history of Urbana that has two girls taking a selfie in one of the pictures. So congratulations on that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion goes to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The selfie convinced me.
Okay, we have four real quick ones, I hope. John, Resolution 2017-14R, resolution for improvement by municipality in the Illinois Highway Code, North Lincoln Avenue improvements, engineering and utilities. Resolution 2017-15R, resolution for local public agency amendment number 1 for federal participation for North Lincoln Avenue. And then, those are the two that go together.
Well, good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Bill Gray couldn't be here this evening. He gave me a short brief on these two resolutions. If you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them.
We have a pretty self-explaining memo. Are there any questions? Diane?
I move that, may I make a motion?
Yes, please.
I move that we send resolution number 2017-01-004R to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Diane, seconded by Dennis to send this to council with recommendation for approval. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and resolution 2017-15R.
I'll make a motion. Oh, do you want to explain? Do you want to have the opportunity to explain?
If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Are we talking about the resolutions for the intergovernmental cooperative agreements?
No, we haven't gotten there yet. This is the local public agency amendment number 1. This is it's for the fuel tax and the federal participation piece.
From my understanding on this, there have been some slight increase to the costs, and through that, knowing that, and Bill Gray's getting approval from the federal side of things to acquire more money for this project, it also requires more funding, match funding from the city and the county. And the $100,000, I believe, is just a contingent to make sure that there's enough to complete that project. Out of that $100,000, half of that still is the county's portion of that agreement.
So let's see, Dennis, you made a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we, resolution 2017-01-005R to council with approval.
Second.
Moved by Dennis, seconded by Eric. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that one's, okay. Now we're on resolution 2017-16R, resolution approving a master intergovernmental cooperative purchasing agreement with U.S. Communities Government Purchasing Alliance. And then there's a resolution approving, I'm not sure what 6R and 7R are, how they're different, but.
There's two different purchasing organizations that the city, we staff would like to become members of. One is U.S. Communities,
Okay.
which is an organization that partners with other public agencies, similar to, let's just say, the city of Urbana writes an RFP for a particular widget, and we're members of U.S. communities. We would allow other communities to purchase from that RFP once we, I'm just trying to think of what the word of it is approve of that purchase. And NJPA is another national organization. Actually, it's part of the state of Minnesota's government. What they do is they actually procure items themselves through a selection process, but as a member, other public agencies can buy through that purchasing process.
And the whole point is to save us money, right?
The whole point is to save us. We have a number of things that we need to replace before too long. One is a big boom truck for our electricians. The time it would take for staff to sit down and write the RFP and spell out the specs and answer all the questions and all that, a lot of that paperwork's already been done by these two different purchasing organizations. What we would do is our due diligence to make sure that whatever price was quoted to either one of those purchasing organizations was comparable to what else is out there and to what other competitive opportunities may be there.
Okay. Questions for John? Mayor?
So you would seek bids from both at the same time?
Well, it's not so much seeking bids because.
But you'd ask them both?
Yes.
To get the most information?
If they both offer the same product, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion. on
Move
the,
agenda item number 14 to City Council recommendation for approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Michael Madigan, second by Eric Jacobson. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
And that goes to council. Okay, and then item 15 is Resolution 2017-17R, and that's the resolution approving a joint agreement, cooperative agreement with National Joint Powers Alliance. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to send to council with recommendation for approval by Mike Madigan and seconded by Diane Marlin. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. This goes to council. Seeing no further business, we're adjourned.